Welcome to Simplified UPSC by PPP, where we listen, learn, and grow together.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we turn these massive stacks of research, everything from UN reports to specialized medical journals, into the knowledge you really need to be genuinely well-informed. So for this deep dive, we're focusing on some of the colossal social and economic currents that are shaping modern India. We're specifically pulling from some crucial sociological, demographic, and public health reports that came out in July 2025.
Right.
And what we're looking at is, a nation trying to leapfrog into the future while at the same time managing this immense complexity right at its core.
And that's really our mission today. It's all about synthesis. We're trying to move beyond just the headlines and really crunch the complex and sometimes, conflicting data points from organizations like the UNFPA, the Lancet, and the National Sample Survey Office, the NSSO. So we're aiming to understand the true state of India's inequality and its accelerating demographic future. For you, the listener, this conversation is really going to bridge those vast macro trends like population shifts, wealth concentration, with the very real ground-level implications.
The stuff that actually matters.
Exactly, for policy, for family structure, and for personal economic opportunity.
That structural view is just so essential. So let's dive right in. I think we should start with a topic that feels immediate and, frankly, inescapable. India's rapidly shifting population pyramid.
A huge topic.
It is. And it's critical for understanding the nation's long-term resource allocation.
Yeah.
This falls squarely under GS Paper 1, demography. So let's start with what's being called the silver economy challenge, India's rapid aging.
Right.
The scale of this demographic shift is, well, it's stunning, and it really demands our immediate attention. Our sources, citing the latest UNFPA India data, give us a figure that just crystallizes the challenge.
The 2050 projection.
That's the one.
Yeah.
By 2050, 20% of the Indian population, that's an estimated 319 million people, will be aged 60 or older.
Just think about that number for a second. 319 million.
It's massive. And this isn't some gradual, slow change. It's an accelerating transition that is going to completely reshape resource allocation in just about 25 years. And it's moving faster than developed nations experienced it, which means India has much less time to adapt.
And what's fascinating, but also, deeply concerning, is that this rapid aging isn't just about providing more wheelchairs or building more ramps. There is an accompanying chronic healthcare crisis in the making.
Okay.
And the projections from the Lancet from 2024 are particularly stark on this. The disease burden for these long-term complex neurological disorders is set to just explode. We're looking at Parkinson's disease cases expected to rise by a staggering 168%.
Wow, 168%.
And dementia by 200%. So, think about the specific needs that come with that. Managing these conditions requires specialized geriatric neurologists, long-term care facilities, consistent pharmacological interventions. It's an entire infrastructure that is, right now, fragmented and really insufficient across the country.
And we have to look at this through a gendered lens, too. It's not a gender-neutral process. We know that women, on average, they outlive men. But the sources point out that this longer life comes with a steep and often hidden cost.
Yes. Women face higher disability-adjusted life years. Baileys.
Let's quant that down. What exactly are dailies for our listener?
Sure. So dailies are a measure of the overall disease burden. They're expressed as the number of years you lose due to premature death, plus the years you live with a disability. So while women are living longer, they tend to spend a much greater proportion of those extra years dealing with illness, mobility issues, or some kind of chronic disability.
And the implications of that are profound.
They really are. For the individual, it severely impacts their quality of life, obviously. But for the family, it exponentially increases the burden of caregiving. And that burden, as we know, usually falls disproportionately on other women in the household, which in turn pulls them out of the formal workforce. It's a vicious cycle.
Which leads us straight to the economic fallout. This is often framed around the rising elder dependency ratio.
Right.
So as the proportion of working-age people, the people paying taxes and contributing to growth, as that shrinks relative to the dependent elderly, the strain on public finances just becomes immense, specifically for things like healthcare and pension funds.
And that financial insecurity piece is a massive policy black hole right now. There's a very specific and I'd say worrying data point from the NSSO 75th round. It found that only 28% of the elderly population currently has any formal pension.
Only 28%.
Yes. That means a predictable, guaranteed income stream from a formal scheme, whether it's government or private. So you do the math. If 72% of 319 million people, that's around 230 million seniors, will enter old age without any financial security by 2050, this isn't just an individual hardship story.
No, it's a catastrophe.
It's a catastrophe waiting to happen for state welfare budgets. They'll be relying on informal support from family, which is already under severe strain because of urbanization and migration.
So that's the core of it. The financial safety net is paper thin. But even if the money were there, is the specialized healthcare infrastructure even prepared? For the non-financial demands, I mean, the sheer clinical complexity of this huge group.
Critically, no, it's not. The sources reveal a severe infrastructure gap when it comes to geriatric services. A Ministry of Health and Family Welfare survey exposed a, frankly, shocking reality.
What did it find?
Less than 5% of primary health centers, the PHCs, which are supposed to be the foundational, most accessible layer of India's health system, have dedicated geriatric outpatient department services. An OPD?
Less than 5%.
Yes. So if 9 out of 10 of these local clinics can't offer specialized, continuous care for the chronic conditions common in the elderly, what happens? Patients are forced to travel to district hospitals, which overwhelms those already stretched facilities. Or, more likely, they just forego the care they desperately need.
And that just drives up those dailies we were talking about earlier.
Exactly. It all connects.
So we can't stop this demographic clock from ticking, but we can, in theory, change the outcome. What's the proactive policy goal here? What should we be aiming for?
The goal has to shift, and shift decisively. It needs to go from merely extending life expectancy to achieving what the sources are calling functional longevity.
Functional longevity.
Right. And that means ensuring that those additional years are lived independently, actively, and with minimal disability. It's about maintaining cognitive function, maintaining mobility.
So quality of life, not just quantity.
Precisely. And this requires massive front-loaded investment in preventive elder care today. I'm talking about dedicated programs for bone health, early detection and management of neurological conditions like Parkinson's, robust mental health support for seniors, mobility assistance infrastructure.
A whole ecosystem of care.
A whole ecosystem. The mention of initiatives like the BHARAT study, it signals that policymakers are starting to focus on this quality of life metric. But the implementation, it needs to be universal and rapid to meet that 2050 deadline.
Okay, so now let's shift our focus. We've talked about the silver generation. Let's turn to the youth bulge. This is the generation that will inevitably have to bear the immense economic and social responsibility of caring for that rapidly aging population.
A huge burden.
It is. This conversation is, I think, rightly anchored around the UN's World Population Day 2025 theme, which is all about centering youth voices so they can make autonomous choices about their family and their future. That demographic dividend we always hear about, that window of economic opportunity, it only pays out if this massive youth cohort is genuinely empowered.
And that empowerment isn't just a theory. It's being proven successful on the ground. Our sources give some excellent quantifiable case studies that show a really clear link between agency, education, and economic opportunity, and these things are leading to better demographic outcomes.
Specifically delaying early marriage and childbearing.
Yes, exactly.
So let's look at two specific and successful levers of change. First, there's this community engagement model. Project Advika in Odisha. It was a strategic collaboration between UNICEF and UNFPA.
Right.
This project focused on creating social momentum by empowering village youth through leadership training. So what was the impact on social norms?
The results were profound, especially in tackling the really persistent challenge of child marriage. By equipping young leaders, both young men and women, with advocacy skills and community support, Project Advika successfully led to the declaration of 11,000 villages as child marriage-free zones.
11,000. That's not just policy on paper.
No, this is about changing social acceptance at the grassroots level. And more concretely, through rapid local intervention and awareness campaigns led by these trained youth, they actively stopped 950 child marriages in 2022 alone.
So it shows that when youth are given the tools and the platform,
they become the most effective agents for social change in their own communities, much more effective than any external enforcement effort could ever be.
And then there's Project Manzil in Rajasthan, which offers a perhaps even more crucial economic lever.
Absolutely. Project Manzil focused heavily on economic agency and vocational training. It targeted young women between 18 and 21. It trained 28,000 of them in various skills, linking them to real industry needs.
And the key metric of success.
Was that 16,000 of these young women secured sustained employment. This financial independence, this ability to generate and control their own income, it's a natural catalyst for delaying early marriages and childbirth.
Of course.
When a young woman has purpose and income and status outside of her traditional reproductive role, she gains autonomy over her life choices. It just follows. And this success aligns perfectly with broader government objectives like reducing adolescent fertility and enhancing rights awareness through programs like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao.
So given these successful models, what's the clear policy way forward? How do you scale this and sustain this empowerment on a national level?
Well, first and foremost, you have to guarantee rights-based sexual and reproductive health rights, SRHR.
And what does that mean in practice?
It means universalizing access not just to a full range of contraceptives, but also ensuring safe, accessible abortion services, providing quality infertility care, and crucially integrating mental health support. If we're asking youth to make complex, autonomous life decisions, we have to provide comprehensive support for those choices, physical, psychological, and informational. The policy has to be non-judgmental and holistic.
And we see the data time and time again. Education is still the most powerful tool for demographic change.
It's the ultimate preventative measure. There's UNICEF data confirming that each additional year of secondary education dramatically reduces the probability of child marriage by 6%.
6% per year.
Per year. So the long-term policy has to focus not just on getting girls into school, but on keeping them there, ensuring they complete secondary schooling. Education isn't just about acquiring knowledge, it's an institutionalized period of autonomy that delays those early social pressures.
And that education, of course, must translate into dignified employment. This connects right back to the success we saw in Project Manzel.
And we have to address the quality of that employment. The future workforce needs what the sources call human-centered design and skilling programs. The goal can't just be training for training's sake. It has to be about ensuring access to dignified, secure, and gender-friendly jobs that actively raise female workforce participation. If skilling programs just funnel women into low-wage, precarious sectors, any agency they gain is quickly lost. The jobs must provide stability to truly raise female labor force participation, which is a challenge we're about to get into.
And finally, the sheer diversity of India means a one-size-fits-all approach to youth empowerment is it's doomed to fail.
Precisely. The sources explicitly recommend massive decentralization. We need to encourage state-led innovations and support district-level planning that's tailored specifically to local youth profiles, whether that means managing rural to urban migration flows, addressing specific skill deficits, or tackling local social norms like high child marriage rates.
And what about the structural support?
That's the other half of the equation. Things like improved student housing, high-quality, subsidized childcare, workplace flexibility, and critically safe, accessible public transport. These are all necessary to translate youth aspirations into stable, long-term careers.
Okay, so that's a perfect transition. Moving from demography into the societal structure, let's address GES Paper 1 society. This section concerns some pretty uncomfortable truths about India's social fabric, especially around labor inequality. Let's start with what economists call the Great Indian Paradox, the crisis in the female labor force participation rate, or FLFPR.
Right. The data here reveals a really profound structural contradiction that lasted for almost 2 decades. Between 2005 and 2019, India registered a shocking decline in its FLFPR. It was among the lowest globally.
And this happened even as two things that should have pushed it up were moving in the opposite direction.
Exactly. Fertility rates dropped dramatically, and female educational attainment rose significantly. Conventionally, lower fertility and higher education should fuel massive participation in the workforce. But in India, it didn't.
And this is where we really need to dig into the nuance. If the standard economic levers failed, what is the socioeconomic explanation for this massive counterintuitive phenomenon?
Yeah. The core explanation is complex. It's rooted in sociology and, well, social status. The sources suggest that as household incomes rose, often driven by male earnings, it inadvertently reinforced these very traditional gendered roles.
So as families got a bit richer.
As family incomes rose above the subsistence level, it became economically feasible and crucially socially desirable in many communities to reinforce the model of the man as the primary, visible earner, and for the woman to withdraw into the invisible role of the homemaker.
So withdrawing from visible labor is seen as a status symbol.
It was. Withdrawing from things like farm work or informal daily wage labor was often viewed as a symbol of the household's newfound prosperity.
So the economic gain actually led to a sociological loss and a statistical decline as women shifted from this visible, counted labor to invisible, uncounted household labor.
Precisely. And that's the critical distinction that's so often missed. The work didn't disappear, it just became invisible to the official statistics, which artificially depressed the measured FLFPR. This systemic choice directly undercut the potential gains India should have gotten from its investment in female education and improved health outcomes.
Then, of course, the pandemic hit. And post-COVID data showed this noticeable spike in rural FLFPR. So was this the long-awaited structural correction?
Unfortunately, no. A more rigorous analysis suggests we need to be very cautious here. Our study of the post-COVID dynamics shows that this spike was overwhelmingly driven by distress employment in rural areas.
Distress employment.
Yes. When households faced acute economic shocks, a male job loss, crippling debt, high inflation, women were forced back into immediate, often highly precarious, low-wage jobs. They became the household's emergency economic shock absorber. This was driven by necessity, not opportunity.
So if this spike was rooted in distress, that fundamentally undermines any celebration of the data. How do we prevent women from being treated purely as this emergency buffer instead of as independent economic actors?
That is the critical policy challenge. And the sources note that while rural rates saw this distress-driven spike, the urban FLFPR remains stubbornly stagnant.
Even with digitization and economic revival.
Even with all of that. Which indicates that the systemic barriers to skilled, dignified urban employment for women, things like safety concerns, lack of transport, lack of specialized childcare, they remain firmly in place, even as the broader economy recovers.
So moving beyond this distress employment model, what are the actionable, sustainable policy recommendations for genuine, dignified inclusion?
The recommendations are pretty robust, and they target both physical constraints and these normative barriers. First, massive investment in infrastructure support is simply non-negotiable.
What does that look like?
It means we need to rapidly and vastly expand public childcare infrastructure. Anganwadis have to be upgraded, and urban crèches need to be made ubiquitous, affordable, and high quality. Caregiving constraints are arguably the single biggest physical barrier to women's continuous formal employment.
Okay, so infrastructure addresses the time constraint. What about the nature of the work itself, especially in a rapidly changing economy?
We have to actively promote flexible employment models. This includes incentivizing employers to facilitate part-time work, leveraging gig platforms but doing it ethically, making sure Social Security protections are built in, and expanding remote and hybrid options, particularly in urban service-based sectors, to accommodate those caregiving responsibilities.
And the legal framework.
That's the other key piece. We need rigorous and transparent implementation of the POSH Act for preventing sexual harassment at the workplace and strict enforcement of equal pay laws. We have to create genuinely safe and respectable working environments so women aren't forced to choose between their safety and an income.
And finally, that cultural element, the norms. How do you shift that entrenched sociological idea of the woman as a full-time homemaker being a status symbol?
This requires driving a massive societal overhaul through what the sources call norms transformation campaigns. It stresses the critical need for nationwide, persistent campaigns aimed at normalizing shared domestic responsibilities and shared caregiving roles for men and women.
And affirming women's right to work.
And fundamentally affirming women's right to work outside the home, free from social stigma or suspicion. If the norm doesn't shift, the infrastructure investment will just be wasted. We also have to invest heavily in urban infrastructure for inclusion-safe, well-lit public transport, gender-friendly public conveniences, creche-linked workplaces, making the urban environment itself an enabler, not a barrier.
Okay, so if the FLFPR crisis illuminates gender inequality, let's widen the lens to economic inequality overall. We hear a lot about metrics like the Gini coefficient, but our sources strongly argue that this traditional measure is critically insufficient. It doesn't capture the depth and the structural nature of India's current wealth and income gaps.
That's an essential distinction for the listener to grasp. The problem with an aggregate measure like the Gini coefficient, which basically measures how far a nation's income distribution deviates from perfect equality, is that it hides the intensity of concentration at the extremes.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, Gini gives you a general snapshot of relative income distribution, but it fails to reveal the massive wealth held by, say, the top 0.1%, or the profound financial distress faced by the bottom 50%. It's like it paints a picture of the entire forest, but completely obscures the size of the tallest trees and the struggle of the undergrowth.
So if Gini isn't enough, what supplemental metrics do we need to get a clearer, more honest picture of wealth concentration?
We have to rely on what are called supplemental metrics, which deliberately drill into the tails of the distribution. These include rigorously tracking the top 1% wealth share, which reveals precisely how much the national wealth is concentrated at the very top. We also need to use P90, P10 ratios, comparing the wealth or income of the person at the 90th percentile to the person at the 10th percentile.
And you also mentioned the Thiel index. That sounds much more technical. What does that tell us that the others don't?
The Thiel index is crucial because, unlike Gini, which kind of averages things out, Thiel is highly sensitive to changes at the extreme ends of the wealth distribution. It measures deviation from an even distribution, and its unique weighting mechanism lets it shine a policy spotlight on the disparity between the top and the bottom simultaneously. Using these complementary data points is the only way to move beyond a simple relative measure to understand the absolute structural power imbalance that high concentration represents.
So why should the average citizen or a policymaker care about these technical metrics? High inequality can often feel like a moral issue, but what are the concrete negative economic implications for the entire nation?
The sources highlight three severe implications that really do cripple national progress. First, high inequality severely reduces economic mobility for the bottom 50% of the population.
Makes sense.
If the structural gaps are too wide, and if opportunity is overwhelmingly inherited, half the population simply cannot move upward, regardless of their hard work, their education, or their potential. This represents a profound waste of human capital.
And what about its effect on the overall market?
Second, it leads directly to lower aggregate demand. This is a purely economic argument. The marginal propensity to consume is lower for the very rich. The vast savings held by the wealthy don't translate proportionally into the immediate consumption and spending that stimulates broad economic growth.
Yeah.
Wealth concentration effectively dampens the overall market size and slows down general economic momentum.
And the third implication touches on the very stability of the social contract.
That's probably the most insidious effect: social fragmentation. When inequality is perceived as deeply unfair, intractable, and rooted in cronyism rather than merit, it fuels intense social resentment.
And that resentment can be weaponized.
Exactly. The danger is that this resentment is often successfully redirected by populist forces toward identity politics, focusing on caste, religion, or regionalism. And this distracts the public and the government from focusing on the inclusive economic development and structural reforms that could genuinely fix the wealth gap. So inequality itself becomes a driver of political polarization.
Shifting focus again, the next layer of inequality isn't about raw income. It's about access, agency, and the rule of law. Let's confront the digital divide. India has celebrated this massive digital growth, UPI, DigiLocker, soaring internet connections. But the NSS 2025 data reveals that growth does not equal equity. Gender disparities are persistent.
The growth figures are phenomenal, you can't deny that. Internet connections grew from 25 crore in 2014 to nearly 97 crore by 2024. UPI is leading global real-time payments. But digital growth doesn't automatically erase exclusion. The shortcomings are rooted in two primary gaps identified in the sources: access versus ownership, and the crucial skill gap.
Let's break down that access gap, particularly for rural women.
The statistics are concerning. In rural India, only 56.9% of young women own their own mobile phones, compared to a stark 81.2% of men.
So it's not just about having access to a phone, it's about owning it.
Exactly. The problem isn't just access to a device, it's the lack of ownership. The sources note that women often have to rely on a mobile phone owned by a male relative, a husband, a father, a brother, which inherently limits their autonomy, restricts their usage hours, and compromises their privacy. If a woman can't independently receive government communication or access digital financial services or browse information without surveillance, the digital revolution has basically passed her by.
And this leads directly to the skill or utility gap. Are people moving beyond just passive consumption?
Not nearly fast enough. Digital use is heavily skewed toward consumption: social media, entertainment, communication, and away from creation, economic application, or what's called civic tech. For example, only 22.9% of youth surveyed had ever drafted a digital document.
Wow.
And just 32.2% had created a digital presentation. This suggests a failure of the education system to translate access into functional digital skills for the workforce. And furthermore, civic tech awareness is dangerously low. Only 26.9% of youth know how to file a cybercrime complaint. And this awareness drops below 22% for rural women. This dependence and low skill level prevent them from fully leveraging digital tools for civic engagement or economic empowerment.
Let's move to another systemic barrier, one impacting mobility and residence. We're talking about the constitutional and linguistic hostility faced by internal migrants, which undermines Article 19.
This is a major issue that attacks the very foundational premise of national unity. Discrimination against migrants, the sources cite examples like Bahari workers facing hostility in Assam or Gujarati workers facing targeted restrictions, is a clear violation of a fundamental constitutional right.
Article 19.
Article 19, which guarantees all citizens the right to reside, settle, or work anywhere in India. When regional populism exploits identity over inclusive governance, or when local opposition stalls infrastructure projects because outsiders are needed, the rights of migrant workers, who are the backbone of the gig economy and construction, are the first casualties. It undermines the constitutional promise of free internal labor movement.
And language is often used as a weapon in this context.
It acts as a powerful separator and isolator. You get what the sources call language as an isolator when essential public services, like in hospitals, ration shops, government offices, are monolingual, alienating non-speakers. This structural exclusion fosters mutual suspicion, stereotyping, and local resentment towards migrant populations.
But it can work the other way, too.
It can. The sources also note that language as a connector is vital for integration. When migrants learn a local language, whether it's Kannada, Tamil, or Bangla, they gain an identity beyond just their labor role. Fluency improves job access, it facilitates social bonding, and it strengthens national pluralism, breaking down those regional silos.
Finally, let's address a crisis of institutional accountability, specifically within workplaces and educational institutions. This is highlighted by a deeply tragic and systemic failure.
Yes, the sources raise the tragic and critical context of the student's self-immolation incident in Odisha. This student allegedly took this extreme step after her sexual harassment complaint was dismissed or mishandled by her college's Internal Complaints Committee, or ICC. This devastating event has rightly triggered a nationwide scrutiny into the effectiveness, the fairness, and the integrity of these ICCs, which are mandated under the POSH Act.
That story is deeply disturbing. And it speaks less to the failure of one single committee and more to a profound national crisis of trust in the institutions that are designed to protect the most vulnerable. If the mechanism that's meant to provide recourse fails, what recourse is left?
Precisely. That's the conclusion. When institutional safeguards designed to protect victims fail, the consequences are devastating. It leads to a profound crisis of trust in these systemic accountability mechanisms. The effectiveness of the entire ICC framework has to be rigorously reviewed and reformed to ensure impartiality, confidentiality, and integrity. They need to be transformed from a mere box-ticking compliance exercise into genuinely functional victim-centric bodies. Until that accountability is guaranteed, inequality will persist.
Okay, moving now to GS Paper 2, Health and Welfare. Let's address the crucial topic of public health. Our source material provided extensive context on the ongoing importance of maternal health in India, but the specific hard data for this deep dive shifts our focus to emerging threats and structural implementation gaps. So let's start with a major step forward in infectious disease control. Indigenous preventative measures.
Right. One of the most promising public health stories of the moment is the progress in Phase 3 trials for India's first indigenous dengue vaccine. This is a crucial collaboration between Panacea Biotech and the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR.
And dengue is a huge issue.
A huge, pervasive mosquito-borne illness that continues to cause these cyclical, often crippling epidemics across the country. So this breakthrough is highly significant.
So give us the technical details. What makes this vaccine a significant scientific step forward beyond just, national self-reliance?
Okay, so the vaccine is technically a tetravalent vaccine. This is essential because dengue is caused by 4 distinct viral strains.
So to protect against all 4.
Exactly. It's designed to offer robust immunity against all 4 simultaneously, which significantly reduces the risk of a severe repeat infection, and that's often the most dangerous outcome of dengue. It uses a live attenuated virus, which means it introduces weakened viruses to safely trigger a durable immune response.
And the trial is extensive.
It's massive. It's already enrolled over 8,000 participants across 20 centers nationwide. The protocol is rigorous. It's a two-dose regimen followed by 2 years of dedicated medical follow-up to assess the long-term efficacy and safety.
The significance of this is massive, especially when you think about dengue's impact on family life and resource use.
Absolutely. The vaccine offers critical protection for children who face a much higher hospitalization risk during these cyclical outbreaks. And for India, which has historically relied on expensive imported vaccines or treatments, having an indigenous process-patented solution is vital for public health impact and for achieving a stronger disease control framework. Success here wouldn't just secure domestic supply, it would position India as a global leader in combating this specific tropical disease.
But while the vaccine trials are promising, what specific challenges does the source material highlight about the rapid scale-up that would be required? Things like cold chain management or combating potential vaccine hesitancy in rural areas.
That is precisely the next hurdle. The sources emphasize that while the science is sound, the operational logistics are immense. Maintaining the cold chain integrity required for a live attenuated virus vaccine across India's varied climates is a massive logistical undertaking.
And then there's the human factor.
Right. Ensuring equitable distribution and overcoming vaccine skepticism, which has been heightened since the pandemic, will require robust public awareness campaigns and the integration of this vaccine into existing childhood immunization schedules. The scale of the delivery effort may ultimately be just as complex as the scientific breakthrough itself.
That's a significant move in infectious disease control. Now let's jump to the cutting edge of medicine, genomics and traditional health systems.
Yes, we saw an important move toward health equity with the launch of the Gujarat Tribal Genome Sequencing Project, the first of its kind in India. This project is sweeping. It's covering diverse tribal groups across 17 districts, and it's an explicit attempt to use cutting-edge science to close these historical health gaps.
What's the policy objective of sequencing the tribal genome? I mean, why is this necessary when general genetic databases already exist?
The primary goal is twofold: building a necessary reference genetic database and improving healthcare equity. Tribal populations often have unique genetic profiles and, consequently, a higher prevalence of specific inherited disorders due to endogamy.
Like sickle cell anemia.
Exactly, like sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, or specific metabolic conditions. A general database just can't adequately serve them. The sequencing enables early, targeted detection of these disorders and, crucially, it allows for the development of personalized healthcare protocols tailored specifically to these communities. It's science-led tribal empowerment, ensuring that the benefits of precision medicine reach the most marginalized groups.
And speaking of advanced and personalized health, let's look at this intriguing integration of artificial intelligence into traditional Indian systems like Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani.
This is a fascinating area where India is really taking a global leadership role. The World Health Organization, the WHO, recently launched its roadmap on AI in traditional medicine. It's a strategic guide for the ethical, effective, and safe integration of AI into these ancient systems.
And India spearheaded this.
Yes, India spearheaded this proposal via the Ministry of AYUSH. The roadmap emphasizes the digitization of traditional knowledge, setting global AI standards for practice, and promoting personalized medicine approaches within the Ayurveda, Siddha, and Unani systems.
So this is clearly not just an internal Indian initiative. It's a push for global standardization.
Absolutely. This is the first roadmap of its kind launched under the WHO's Global Initiative on AI for Health. It formally acknowledges India's deep expertise in traditional knowledge and technology, citing ongoing domestic initiatives like the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library and Genomics. The vision is to use AI to analyze vast amounts of traditional data like pulse diagnosis, herbal formulation efficacy, to create scientifically validated, customized, and globally recognized healthcare standards that blend traditional wisdom with modern analytical rigor.
Okay, for our final segment, before we wrap up, let's look at the implementation side of welfare, where structural gaps continue to result in the wrongful exclusion of vulnerable citizens, even with India's move toward digitization. Let's start with the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, or PARAKH, and its serious concerns about the functioning of UPSC, or Aadhaar.
The PAC urging a comprehensive review of UPSC's functioning is a major policy signal. The core concern comes from numerous reports that biometric verification failures, often due to poor infrastructure, dry fingers in rural environments, or equipment malfunctions, have led to the wrongful and repeated exclusion of eligible beneficiaries from crucial government welfare schemes.
Things like ration distribution or pension payments.
Exactly. And while Aadhaar-linked direct benefit transfers have undeniably eliminated large-scale leakages through middlemen, the failures at that last mile are denying rightful entitlements to the people who need them most.
So it's the double-edged sword of digital welfare. Massive efficiency gains at the macro level, but potentially catastrophic exclusion if the technology fails the individual.
That's it, exactly. And the PAC's scrutiny also raised serious unresolved concerns over data security breaches, the integrity of the data infrastructure, and the overall architecture's protection of fundamental privacy rights. The sources conclude that the reliance on Aadhaar can't be absolute. There have to be functional, immediate, and accessible alternate verification methods to ensure that a technological failure never translates into the denial of food, medicine, or a pension.
And finally, we have to mention a specific funding shortfall that's impacting marginalized students who are aiming for higher studies abroad. It demonstrates a failure of resource allocation for human capital development.
Yes, the National Overseas Scholarship Scheme, a critical program designed to enable students from scheduled castes and other marginalized communities to pursue a master's or PhD abroad, has faced a severe bottleneck. The Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment recently withheld provisional award letters for 66 out of 106 selected candidates.
And this wasn't because they weren't qualified.
No, not at all. It wasn't due to a lack of merit. The source can confirm it was explicitly due to a critical shortage of funds allocated for the current cycle. This failure directly impacts highly qualified students seeking global academic opportunities, and it undermines the scheme's long-term objective of enhancing human capital and creating leadership within the most vulnerable sections of society. It's a tragic example of policy intent being defeated by budgetary constraints.
This deep dive has taken us on a really complex, high-stakes journey across India's social crossroads. We started with the demographic time bomb of the rapidly aging population, 319 million seniors by 2050, and the desperate need to secure not just a longer life, but functional longevity.
Right.
We then navigated the gender paradox in the labor market, observing how societal status and distress employment are masking a stubbornly stagnant urban female participation rate. And we wrapped up with the exciting push for genomic equity and AI in traditional health, which was immediately tempered by the systemic failures causing wrongful welfare exclusion, and that profound crisis in institutional accountability we saw with the failure of certain ICCs.
The connecting thread weaving through all three of these sections is undeniable. The nation is achieving these incredible feats of digital and economic growth, but that growth is failing to translate into equitable outcomes for the most vulnerable unless deep structural reforms are simultaneously pursued.
So the so what here is?
The so what here is that India can't afford to exclusively celebrate indigenous technological progress, like a dengue vaccine or AI in Ayurveda, while ignoring the systemic administrative failures that affect its most vulnerable citizens.
It's that gap between the policy intent and the implementation integrity that has to be closed. The stories of the elderly without pensions, women without digital ownership, migrants facing constitutional hostility, students losing scholarships to funding shortfalls, they're all connected.
They are?
They show that these systemic failures have to be addressed just as rigorously as we celebrate innovation. And this raises an important question.
Yes. We saw that compelling NSS data that rural women's reliance on their male relatives' mobile phones restricts their digital use. It limits their skills to mere consumption, and it fundamentally compromises their privacy. So if digital autonomy is the key to empowerment, what specific non-monetary policy intervention beyond just providing phone ownership could truly guarantee digital privacy and independent, productive participation for rural women? How do we fundamentally turn their digital consumption into digital creation?
Huge challenge.
That is the challenge of equitable digital design for the next decade of India's social development.
Food for thought indeed, and a question that touches the very heart of digital equity. Thank you for joining us for this crucial deep dive into India's social future.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine receiving a massive national report card, one that goes way beyond just GDP figures.
Right.
Today, we're diving deep into the policy architecture and, the actual data that tracks the fundamental health and knowledge of India.
Home to the world's largest youth population. That's the key.
Exactly. We're looking at this crucial 5-year mark. How well is young India learning? How are resources actually turning into nutritional security? And how is the whole system being set up for the future?
It's an absolutely essential exercise. Really, it's about governance and accountability. It forces us to look beyond that aspirational language you always see in major policies and get down to what's actually happening on the ground.
And our sources today give us a pretty rigorous perspective on that.
They do. It's a two-part perspective. First, we have a really critical look at the implementation of the National Education Policy, the NEP 2020.
And that's paired with some hard, pretty sobering national assessment data.
It is. And then we pivot.
Right, to wellness. We'll examine the structural improvements being recommended for these huge national nutrition schemes.
And we'll end with something pretty surprising and globally relevant.
India's leadership in integrating artificial intelligence with traditional medicine, Ayurveda, and AI.
So our mission today is ambitious. We're analyzing that inevitable gap between the policy ambition, the blueprint, if you will.
And the real-world performance, the scorecard.
Precisely. We're looking for the structural, the governance, and the digital levers that, if they're used properly, are designed to speed up the application of these reforms across the entire country.
So let's start with that grand plan for education. The National Education Policy 2020 it was rightfully heralded as this monumental once-in-a-generation shift.
Absolutely.
Its goal was nothing less than to overhaul the entire educational structure, right? That old rigid system.
It's input-focused system, yeah.
Yeah.
A relic of the past.
So we are 5 years into the rollout. What are the key features that really define this transition? What are the philosophical changes they're trying to impose?
Well, what's fascinating here is that the NEP isn't just an update to the curriculum. It represents a deep philosophical commitment.
The commitment to what exactly?
To child-centric, competency-based learning. And this is reflected across 7 critical features our sources get into.
Okay.
The first, and it's certainly the most visible structural change, is the replacement of that decades-old 10+2 system.
The old 10+2, which it basically ignored that critical development window before grade 1, didn't it?
Completely. And then it squeezed all the learning into a high-stakes 2-year prep window for college entrance exams.
So how does the new structure fix that?
It's replaced by the 5+3+3+4 structure, and the focus has fundamentally shifted to the very beginning of the learning journey.
The 5+3+3+4. Okay, so that first 5, what does that cover?
That initial 5 covers the foundational stage, when it's from ages 3 to 8.
3 to 8. So it's intentionally integrating early childhood care.
Right. 3 years of Anganwadi or Balvatika with the first 2 years of primary school, grades 1 and 2.
And that integration, I imagine, is where the battle for foundational literacy and numeracy, FLN, is supposed to be won.
Won or lost, exactly.
That urgency around FLN is so critical. I think we often overlook the sheer scale of the crisis the NEP is trying to solve. You have millions of kids getting to grade 5 or even 8 without being able to read a basic sentence.
Or do simple arithmetic. And by focusing so intensely on those first 5 years, the policy acknowledges that trying to fix it later on, well, it's far more expensive and, frankly, much less effective than building that foundation right from the start.
It makes sense.
It does. If a child enters grade 3 without those basic skills, they stop learning to read and start having to read to learn.
And they fall behind immediately.
Instantly. That is the core structural deficiency the policy is trying to fix. The next stages just build on this foundation.
So the next 3 years.
That's grades 3 to 5, the preparatory stage. It introduces play, discovery, and, some light textbook usage.
And then the middle and secondary stages.
The second 3 is grades 6 to 8. That's the middle stage. This is where it mandates things like experiential learning, vocational exposure.
Like coding or basic crafts.
Exactly. And a serious move toward multidisciplinary study. It's trying to break down those rigid walls between arts, sciences, and commerce early on.
I see. And the final 4.
That covers secondary education, grades 9 to 12. It offers much greater subject flexibility and deeper preparation in critical thinking. The whole point is to produce citizens who are not just functionally literate, but who also have the critical thinking skills you need for the 21st century.
So if the new structure is the framework, then the next features, curricular reform and strategic pedagogy, they define the content and the method.
That's right.
And the key here, like you said, is moving away from rote memorization.
That is the policy's central engine. We have to shift teaching from just transmitting content to fostering conceptual understanding. The sources really stress that learning has to become holistic, integrated, enjoyable, and engaging.
Which means focusing on core concepts, not just memorizing facts for an exam.
Exactly. Real-world application, critical analysis. The goal is genuine mastery.
But that shift in teaching is impossible if the language itself is a barrier. Which brings us to another feature, Multilingualism.
A critical one.
The policy says use the mother tongue or local language until at least grade 5.
And this is significant on so many levels. Pragmatically, the research is consistent. Children grasp complex concepts much faster and deeper when they're taught in their most familiar language.
Their mother tongue.
Right. It directly improves cognitive development, problem solving, all of it. But it also has this national significance. It upholds India's linguistic diversity. We have 22 languages officially recognized in the 8th schedule.
But if multilingualism is so key to early learning, that must put, immense pressure on teacher recruitment and training.
It does.
Especially in diverse regions where one classroom could have kids speaking 3 or 4 different dialects. How does the system even plan to scale high-quality instruction in all these languages?
That is precisely the challenge, and it's why the policy will succeed or fail based on our next feature, Continuous Professional Development, or CPD.
Okay.
The entire NEP framework depends on teachers changing their role. They can't just be lecturers anymore. They have to be facilitators, guides.
Which means they need training.
Robust, regular, and mandatory training. And upskilling in 2 key areas. First, in these new competency-based teaching techniques, and second, in how to bridge that linguistic diversity in the classroom. The sources are clear. Teachers are the frontline executors. Their development is non-negotiable.
Now, moving beyond the classroom itself, the policy also broadened the entire definition of success. It's not just about a percentage score anymore.
No, not at all. That points to the feature of holistic development.
So evaluating the whole child.
Exactly. We're moving beyond marks to include character building, vocational skills, physical education, arts, overall well-being. It asks a systemic question. Is the student functionally prepared for life, for work, for ethical citizenship, or are they just good at passing exams?
And that ties back to the multidisciplinary approach.
It does. It demands that schools recognize and actually credit a whole range of skills and achievements.
Okay, so bridging the gap between all these policy goals and what actually happens in the classroom. That's the measurement piece.
Strategic assessment.
Strategic assessments. This is the new philosophy for testing, designed to hold the system accountable to those holistic goals.
It is.
All right, now let's see what 5 years of effort actually looks like when you hold it up against the hard data. So let's move from the policy blueprint to the execution scorecard. The NEP set these monumental goals. But the data from the national assessment, it presents a sobering but really necessary challenge to this whole reform effort. We're talking about the assessment tool called PARAKH.
We should pause for a second to really understand what PARAKH is and why it's so important.
Okay.
PARAKH stands for Performance Assessment Review and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development.
That's a mouthful.
It is, but it's essentially the national level competency-based student assessment run by the NSERT, and it's replaced the older National Achievement Survey, or NAS.
So what's the difference? Why the change from NAS to PARAKH?
The difference is really philosophical and methodological. The old NAS mostly measured whether students had been taught certain content.
Okay.
PARAKH's mission is deeper. It's trying to standardize assessment across India's many, many school boards and critically measure genuine learning outcomes.
So not what you were taught, but what you can actually do with the knowledge.
Precisely. The ability of a student to apply knowledge versus just being able to reproduce, memorize facts from a textbook. It's trying to set a baseline of core competencies that every child should have at grade 3, 6, and 9, no matter which state board they're in.
And when you look through that competency-based lens, the sources are pretty clear that, 5 years in, the system is still failing to instill practical, real-world knowledge on a wide scale.
That is exactly what the data confirms. The PARAKH Rashtriya Sarvekshan report highlighted significant learning deficits.
Especially in those early and middle school grades.
Yes, grades 3, 6, and 9. And particularly in core subjects like math and science. This just confirms how urgent the policy shift is because the old system, the one we're still largely using, it just failed to instill knowledge that could be used in the real world.
Let's focus on those maths failures because that translates directly into, functional illiteracy in the modern economy. These are critical life skills.
The numbers are deeply concerning. Let's talk functional math. The report found that across the grades they assessed, only 28 to 31% of students could successfully apply concepts like percentage or fractions in a real-life situation.
Only 28 to 31%.
And it gets worse. When they tested the understanding of foundational number sets, the difference between integers, rational numbers, real numbers, Only about 31% of students really grasped it.
Wow. Just think about the implications of that. Only a third of our youth can handle basic concepts like calculating a discount on an item.
Or understanding interest rates or compound growth.
Exactly. If a competency-based question asks a student to figure out the cost of a jacket after a 30% discount, and 2/3 of them can't do it, that reveals a huge functional gap. It directly impacts their ability to get a good job, pursue vocational training, even manage their own household finances. It's a direct bottleneck to all our skilling targets.
And the gap is just as profound in science. The competency-based questions there revealed a massive deficit.
What do they find?
Only 34% of students could confidently distinguish between living and non-living traits when they were given new examples.
Okay.
And when they tested applied scientific knowledge, only about 1/3 of students could explain fundamental concepts.
Like what kind of concepts?
Like how an electric circuit works, the dynamics of hormonal changes in the body, or the practical effects of magnetic forces.
So that's almost a 2/3 failure rate in understanding the basic physical and biological world around them.
It is. This data really confirms that the challenge isn't just about the curriculum design, it's about implementation. It's about teacher training. It's about knowledge retention. The system is still encouraging surface learning.
But the data isn't all bad, right? The report does give some comparative insights. It highlights regions where implementation seems to be working better.
Yes, and that's vital.
So which states or union territories are actually standing out against this national average?
The top performers, consistently across all 3 grades tested, were Punjab, Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, Chandigarh, and Dadra and Nagar Haveli, Daman, and Diu.
That's fascinating.
These geographical differences are so instructive because they prove that success is possible within the national framework. It forces us to ask the right question. What are these states doing differently?
I guess comes back to what we were talking about earlier, CPD, the teacher training.
That's a good bet.
For a state like Kerala, with its long history of investing in public health and education, they probably managed to train their teachers in these new methods more effectively.
And integrate the multilingual mandate with less friction.
Right. Their success gives the rest of the country a clear blueprint. It shows that if you focus on high-quality teacher capacity, the student outcomes will follow.
Exactly. The problem isn't the policy. The problem is scaling high-quality execution nationwide. But we can't stop there. We can't talk about cognitive capacity and the failure to grasp fractions or physics without addressing the basic physical needs of the students themselves.
You're right. The brain can't function if the body is malnourished. So if 66% of our youth can't grasp foundational science, is the problem just about teaching? Or are we missing a more fundamental input that actually fuels the brain?
A very good question.
And that brings us to physical wellness. India runs some of the largest nutritional schemes on the planet, like the huge midday meal program.
Now in the POSHAN context.
Right. And yet there are these persistent challenges with leakage, with administration, with the quality of the food. It undermines the whole effort.
The reality is, the quality of the meal dictates the quality of cognitive development. It's that simple. The system needs practical, hard-nosed governance changes to ensure transparency and adequacy.
And the way forward points in our source material offer some pragmatic recommendations for this.
5 of them, yes. And the first one, which is arguably the most crucial financial lever, is the need to revise cost norms.
Why does revising a bureaucratic cost allocation matter so much on the ground?
It matters because the base amount of money allocated for each child's meal has often lagged way behind real-world food inflation. For years.
So the numbers are just out of date.
Completely. If the government allocates, say, 5 rupees for a meal, but the actual cost to buy truly nutritious, protein-rich food factoring in inflation and regional price differences is 8 rupees.
Then the meal quality has to suffer.
Inevitably, schools and administrators are forced to cut corners. So revising those cost norms means updating the funding to reflect what food actually costs in different regions. It ensures the meal isn't just calories, but is truly nutritious.
And that structural fix leads right into the second recommendation. Decentralized menu planning.
Yes.
Because a single national menu can't possibly work for the diversity of tastes and crops across all the states.
Exactly. Rigid, centralized menus just lead to waste, to food kids don't want to eat, and to nutritional inefficiency. Allowing states and districts the flexibility to tailor menus to local tastes and what's available, it's essential.
And the sources gave an example of this working well.
They did. They highlighted Odisha's inclusion of millets in their scheme as a success model.
Millets.
Well, millets are nutritionally rich, especially in micronutrients. They're locally grown and they're climate-resilient crops. So this one change serves health goals, agricultural sustainability, and local food culture all at the same time.
Okay, so shifting from the food itself to the administration, one of the biggest problems has always been delays and leakage in the money flow. How do you fix that?
That requires a radical improvement in financial governance, and that's the third point. Ensure timely fund transfers.
So using technology.
Yes, the recommendation is to implement direct transfer systems, ideally using India's digital public infrastructure, the DPI platforms, to send funds directly to the schools.
With strict timelines.
With strict, system-enforced timelines. This dramatically improves efficiency and transparency. It cuts out the middlemen and the points of failure that always delay these essential programs. It's applying DBT principles rigorously.
So once the money is there and the meals are served, you need real-time accountability.
That's the fourth point, strengthening monitoring systems. This moves governance out of the filing cabinet and onto a dashboard.
And that requires a couple of layers.
Two distinct accountability layers. First, you have mandatory tech-enabled real-time dashboards. This gives immediate visibility into how the scheme is performing, from fund dispersal to meal consumption across the entire country.
So the central government can spot a problem immediately.
Exactly. A bottleneck, a sudden drop in reporting, they see it right away. And the second layer is mandatory social audits.
That's community oversight.
Right. It gives local stakeholders, parents, teachers, community leaders, the power and the structure to check meal quality, quantity, and make sure norms are being followed. It injects a necessary layer of democratic accountability.
And that transparency is also key to tackling another issue, one that's not financial but is just as damaging.
Yeah.
Discrimination.
That leads directly to the fifth point. Promote equity and dignity. A meal scheme is fundamentally about equity and respect, not just calories. This means running regular sensitization campaigns to actively eliminate any possibility of caste-based or socioeconomic discrimination in schools.
Ensuring everyone has access and feels respected.
Yes. If a child feels stigmatized receiving the meal, the scheme has failed its most basic dignity requirement.
And finally, the recommendations also talk about leveraging NGO partnerships.
Right. Maximizing effectiveness often means looking outside the rigid government bureaucracy.
Why is that?
Because collaborating with high-quality civil society organizations allows the schemes to address more nuanced issues, psychosocial support, gender issues, deep nutritional gaps that a mass delivery government structure might miss.
So they complement the basic meal delivery.
They do. They can provide sophisticated support, health, and hygiene education. And like we said before, all of these governance changes, this improved nutrition, it's the foundational requirement for lifting those dismal learning outcomes from the PARAKH H report. You fuel the body, you activate the brain.
That transition from these foundational schemes to a more future-forward policy is so important. We've covered classrooms, we've covered kitchens, and we've seen this need for better data and better implementation at scale. Now let's pivot entirely to the future of healthcare.
Okay.
Specifically, how India is positioning itself to lead a global charge in bridging ancient knowledge systems with cutting-edge artificial intelligence.
This is a really strategic move. It highlights how technology can be used for health equity and knowledge structuring, moving beyond just centralized schemes to potentially personalized solutions. The key initiative here is the WHO roadmap on AI in traditional medicine.
That sounds like a powerful convergence. The World Health Organization tackling ancient Indian practices like Ayurveda, but using Silicon Valley tech. What's the scope of this roadmap?
Well, the roadmap's formal title is Mapping the Application of AI in Traditional Medicine. Its goal is to provide a comprehensive, globally applicable guide for the safe, ethical, and effective integration of AI into traditional healthcare systems worldwide.
So not just Ayurveda.
No, Ayurveda, Siddha, Unani, and others. It's an acknowledgement that these traditional systems represent these vast, untapped repositories of medical knowledge.
But they often lack the structured, digitized data formats that modern science demands.
Exactly. And AI is seen as the essential tool to structure, analyze, and bridge that data gap.
And India played a real leadership role here through the Ministry of AYUSH. Why was India so well positioned to lead this?
India's leadership really comes from its comprehensive ecosystem of traditional medicine, combined with its strength in digital public infrastructure.
A unique combination.
It is. India led the proposal by focusing on 3 areas: digitization, establishing personalized medicine concepts within these traditional practices, and creating global standards for using AI in this field. This initiative is globally unique. It's the first of its kind under the WHO's Global Initiative on AI for Health.
And it's just the whole global conversation.
It does. It moves from questioning the validity of traditional medicine to actively structuring its data for systematic drug discovery and integrative clinical practice.
For this integration to work, though, you need some critical Indian digital assets to be leveraged globally. What are the key initiatives that are already part of this framework?
Two really stand out. The first is the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library, or TKDL.
The TKDL.
This is globally recognized as an essential protection mechanism for intellectual property rights for IPR. The TKDL has digitized traditional Indian knowledge related to AYUSH in 5 international languages.
And what does that achieve?
It serves 2 key functions. First, it prevents foreign companies from patenting traditional Indian practices by creating what's called prior art.
So it protects the knowledge.
Yes. And at the same time, by making this knowledge accessible in a structured, searchable digital format, it enables AI systems to analyze patterns, compounds, and treatment data. So you get protection and data utilization at the same time.
That's a massive shield against biopiracy while also fueling future research. What's the second initiative, the one that uses genomics?
The second is genomics. This really represents the highest ambition of integrative medicine.
Genomics.
Right. So traditional systems like Ayurveda rely on these individualized constitutional types known as Prakriti.
Prakriti, the psychophysical constitution of a person.
Exactly. Often categorized into Vata, Pitta, or Kapha types, which then guides personalized treatment. Genomics uses modern, high-tech tools like genomics and other molecular markers to generate data that validates and formalizes those ancient concepts.
Wait, let's unpack genomics for a second. How does genomic data validate a concept as ancient and individualized as Prakriti?
It creates a quantifiable, data-backed layer of evidence. So a traditional practitioner might classify a patient based on physical traits, temperament, lifestyle. Genomics takes that classification and then overlays it with their genetic data. Researchers will look for specific genetic markers, SNPs they're called, that show a higher prevalence in people classified as, say, a Pitta type.
So they're looking for a statistical correlation.
A statistical correlation between a specific genetic signature and a traditional Prakriti type. If they can show that, they move the concept from anecdotal observation to data-backed, personalized classification.
Which allows for much more precise diagnosis and treatment.
And eventually, drug discovery targeted to specific genetic profiles or specific Prakritis.
That makes the complexity so much more accessible. You're using cutting-edge science to find evidence for these time-tested holistic principles. And this quest for personalized health is also reflected in some hyperlocal projects in India too, isn't it? It is. I'm thinking about the Gujarat Tribal Genome Sequencing Project.
That project is a powerful local example of this broader integrative vision. Gujarat was the first Indian state to launch a dedicated tribal genome sequencing project.
And the goal there?
The goal is to build a high-quality, comprehensive reference genetic database for its diverse tribal populations, covering groups across 17 districts. This database is critical because these populations often have unique genetic signatures and a higher prevalence of certain hereditary diseases.
So what's the practical benefit of creating this huge genetic database for these communities?
The primary significance is all about bridging the health equity gap. The project uses genomics to enable highly tailored treatment and early detection of genetic diseases that are common in these populations, like sickle cell anemia or thalassemia.
So by understanding their specific genetic predispositions, you can customize medical care.
You can customize interventions, you can target preventative care, and eventually you can feed that data into AI models for population health management. It's the core principle of personalized medicine, using high-tech tools to provide customized care to those who need it most. And you really can't overstate the magnitude of this shift. By integrating AI, genomics, and traditional knowledge, India is transforming ancient cultural practices into a globally recognized, structured, and data-backed system. It's providing a validated platform for modern research, for drug discovery, and for genuine, personalized, integrative medicine.
It's been powerful to see these fields that seem so separate. Classroom learning, meal scheme logistics, ancient medicine, all converging on the exact same principles. Data-backed decisions, competency-focused outcomes, and increasingly personalized solutions across all our social sectors. We started with the policy blueprint of the NEP.
Right, the aspiration.
We reviewed the necessary challenge from the PARAKH scorecard.
The reality check.
Discussed the governance fixes needed for the nutritional fuel, and then we ended on this digital frontier of AI and AYUSH.
The overall narrative is clearly one of moving beyond these generalized policies toward precise, measurable, and technologically integrated solutions.
Yeah.
The central challenge for the next 5 years is moving from pilot successes and sophisticated frameworks like what we're seeing in Kerala and Punjab to achieving universal, high-quality implementation.
Right. We have to make sure that the child in the most remote district has access to the same quality education, nutrition, and health insights as the child in the capital city.
That scalability is everything.
It really is. We've seen the tremendous success India has had in exporting its digital public infrastructure.
Yeah.
I mean, think of systems like UPI
Which revolutionized financial transactions.
globally by building this public open source technology layer. So if India successfully creates a robust, ethical AI framework for traditional medicine, digitizing the TKDL, integrating it with genomics, it raises an important question. Could the digitization and integration of traditional knowledge, this unique marriage of AYUSH and AI, become India's next great public infrastructure export to the global south, bridging ancient wisdom and modern technology for planetary health?
A truly successful and ethically governed model could absolutely offer the world a third way. A blueprint for personalized wellness that blends data-driven efficiency with time-tested holistic approaches. It could create a globally applicable model that other developing nations grappling with their own health equity issues could adopt directly. The potential for global application and for setting a new standard in integrative medicine is just immense.
That potential is a powerful thought for reflection. We thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the foundation and future of India's social development landscape. Go forth and connect the dots.
Welcome back to the deep dive. We've got a whole stack of sources you've sent over, and they cover, well, just about everything. We're going from the highest peaks of the Himalayas right down to the microscopic world inside the human gut.
It's a huge range. And our job, as always, is to cut through all that noise and just pull out the essential insights you need to understand what's happening.
And today's deep dive, it really feels like it's all about tension, doesn't it? On one hand, you have these incredible data-driven successes in conservation.
But then you immediately contrast that with, this grinding deadlock in global climate talks and some really enormous compromises being made in, say, domestic energy policy. It's a story of push and pull.
Exactly. And while we're navigating those huge geopolitical pressures, we're going to pivot completely and look at how science is just racing ahead, promising these incredibly personalized, precise health solutions for everything from dengue fever to genetic disorders in tribal communities.
So our mission today is to try and synthesize all of these seemingly separate threads. We want to help you understand the cascading effects of these decisions, whether they're being made in a research lab, a ministry office, or at a global summit.
Okay, let's unpack this. And we're going to start with a story that is, a genuine, undeniable conservation win. And it's one that's being driven not just by dedicated people on the ground, but by some pretty advanced technology. When you think about high-stakes conservation, it's hard not to think of the tiger. And the success of Project Tiger, it's one of the great stories. It launched way back in 1973.
It really is. It's what we call an umbrella species program, managed by the National Tiger Conservation Authority, the NTCA. The idea being if you protect the tiger, you protect its entire habitat and everything that lives in it.
And the milestone they've just hit is, well, it's staggering.
It really is. India has officially achieved the global commitment goal, which is often called TX2. That was the target to double the wild tiger population, and they've done it ahead of schedule.
Wow. So what are the numbers we're looking at now?
The current population estimate as of 2024 sits at 3,682 tigers. It's a huge success, and it really demonstrates that focused in situ conservation can work.
In situ, meaning protecting the species right there in its natural habitat.
Exactly. It shows it's possible even when you're trying to balance the needs of a massive human population living nearby.
And that balancing act is really the key, isn't it? I saw that these tigers, all 3,682 of them, they're in 58 reserves, which covers just 2% of India's land mass.
Right, and that habitat is often shared with nearly 60 million people. So the long-term security of the tiger is completely tied to how sustainable those shared landscapes are.
What's really fascinating, though, is how the methods have evolved. It's not just about counting tigers anymore.
No, not at all. The entire conservation approach has shifted. It's moved from, just counting stripes to analyzing DNA. And this transition is so clearly illustrated in another conservation story, the greater one-horned rhinoceros.
Okay, a species that the IUCN classifies as vulnerable.
That's right. And here, the science gets really, really specific, almost like a forensic investigation.
Yeah. And that brings us to this thing called the ROTUS system. It sounds like something out of a crime show. How exactly is the Assam Forest Department using genetics to fight poaching?
It's an incredibly sophisticated tool. ROTA stands for the Rhino DNA Index System. What they're doing is analyzing genetic markers from stored horn samples.
Stored samples from where?
From horns that were recovered from poachers or destroyed by authorities before 2021. They have 2,573 of them in storage. The goal is to build a completely unassailable genetic database for forensic tracking.
To really understand that, I guess we first have to understand the horn itself, because I think most people, myself included, assume it's some kind of bone.
And that's the crucial misconception. It's not bone at all. The rhino horn is made almost entirely of keratin,
Keratin, like our hair and fingernails.
the very same fibrous structural protein. It's also solid, not hollow like a cow's horn. And it grows continuously, maybe about 2 centimeters a year. And that continuous growth is absolutely essential for the science.
Why is that? How does the growth help?
Because the animal's diet, the geography it lives in, the climate, all of these factors influence how the horn grows. They create these distinct keratin layers over time.
So when they take a sample of a horn, they're not just getting DNA, they're getting a kind of an environmental history embedded right in the material?
That's a perfect way to put it, an environmental history.
Mm.
The ROTA system uses this natural variability to create a unique genetic fingerprint for each and every sample.
And once you have that fingerprint,
Well, then, if a horn is seized somewhere in an illegal trade network, say in another country, conservation authorities can match its DNA profile against this huge database. They can trace it back to known rhino populations, maybe to a specific park, or in some cases, even to a specific individual animal.
so it provides irrefutable forensic evidence for a prosecution.
Precisely. It directly aids the anti-poaching efforts, because you're not just catching a low-level poacher, you're tracing the entire trade route. You're building cases against the criminal networks that run the whole operation.
That really raises the stakes for poachers then. It's not just about evading patrols in a park anymore. Now they have to evade DNA analysis, which is, well, it's a whole different level of risk.
It is. And it's critical for protecting the strongholds. Places like Kaziranga National Park in Assam, which has the biggest population, and also areas like Jaldapara in West Bengal. This is targeted, high-tech science in action. Hashtag #tag 1.2, unearthing hidden biodiversity. And that's a perfect pivot, actually. We're moving from these huge charismatic animals like tigers and rhinos to species that, are often completely overlooked. The sources highlighted the first ever census that was dedicated exclusively to grassland birds,
Grassland birds, that's interesting. Why are they so important?
because they're what ecologists call critical indicators. The health of their population is a direct barometer for the health of the entire grassland habitat. If the birds are struggling, the ecosystem is struggling.
That makes a lot of sense. And grassland ecosystems are some of the most threatened habitats globally, right? They're often seen as just empty space, ripe for development.
Exactly. They're rapidly diminishing and often just completely underestimated.
So how do you even conduct a census for tiny birds in these vast open spaces? It seems like it would be incredibly difficult to track them visually.
It would be. So they didn't. They leveraged technology, specifically acoustic analysis combined with AI. They used a program called BirdNet and spectrogram analysis.
Spectrograms, so they're looking at visualizations of sound.
Right. They're essentially identifying the species purely by their unique songs and calls across 29 different locations. Instead of trying to spot a little brown bird in a sea of brown grass, they just listened very, very carefully with AI as their expert ear.
That's a brilliant approach. So what were the key findings from this audio-centric census?
So it was hugely effective. They documented 43 different species in total. And crucially, it identified several species that are under severe threat.
Like what?
They found 1 critically endangered species, 2 that are endangered, and 6 that are classified as vulnerable, all according to the IUCN Red List. So it confirms that these grasslands, which might look empty, are actually hosting significant biodiversity that needs immediate protection.
Was there any particularly, exciting or hopeful finding in all of that?
Yes, actually. The study gave a really optimistic data point about the endangered Finn's weaver.
Okay.
They located and documented over 85 nests of this one species. And it's a species that's endemic to the Brahmaputra floodplains. Finding such a high concentration of successful nesting sites for an endangered bird is, Well, it's gold dust for conservationists.
Because it tells you exactly where you need to focus your protection efforts. This patch of land right here is critical.
That's it, exactly. It allows for highly targeted habitat protection. But, the census wasn't all good news. It also really highlighted the threats these ecosystems are facing.
Which are?
It reinforces what we already suspected.
Yeah.
You have habitat loss from what's called ecological succession. That's where grasslands naturally start to transition into woody scrublands if they're not managed. Then there's overgrazing, encroachment from agriculture, and of course, the slow creeping impacts of climate change that alter the water availability during different seasons.
So grasslands aren't just a leave-it-alone kind of habitat. They need active management to survive.
They absolutely do.
It's a beautiful counterpoint to this idea that we've mapped and discovered everything there is to know about our natural world. We also saw another reminder of that, right? The sheer unexplored biodiversity hidden away in our bio-hotspots.
Yes. The discovery of a new flowering plant species, Begonia nischiorum.
Where's that found?
It was recently discovered in the East Kameng district of Arunachal Pradesh. It just confirms again that the Eastern Himalayas are this immense genetic treasure trove. Even in a plant group like Begonia, which is really well studied, the potential for new discoveries is still huge. There's so much we still don't know. So now let's pivot a little. We've talked about protecting these pristine natural habitats. Now let's talk about integrating productive nature back into human landscapes. This brings us to the Ministry of Environment, Forest, and Climate Change, or MOE-FCC. They recently released something called the Model Rules for Felling Trees in Agricultural Lands.
Right, and the intention here seems clearly positive. Agroforestry, the idea of integrating trees into farmlands, is a huge opportunity.
A massive one. It helps with carbon sequestration, it diversifies income for farmers, and it helps India meet its national climate goals. The whole point of this policy is to simplify what is often a very complex and frankly prohibitive set of regulations around cutting down trees, even ones you've planted yourself on your own land.
Cutting through the red tape, basically.
Precisely. The goal is to provide a comprehensive, streamlined framework for farmers. It covers everything you'd need to make growing trees on your non-forest land an attractive economic choice. Registering your plantation, getting the right permissions to fell the trees when they mature, and then, crucially, transporting the timber to market.
And this all aligns with the National Agroforestry Policy from 2014. It feels like a necessary next step to encourage people to invest in the long-term cycle of growing trees.
It is. It's a really well-designed policy intervention, on paper.
But here's where it gets interesting, isn't it? The gap between a good policy on paper and the reality of implementing it. The sources highlighted some specific structural barriers that could threaten the whole rollout.
They did. And there are 3 really critical ones that could severely limit the national impact of what is otherwise an excellent framework.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first one is about the digital infrastructure. The whole system is supposed to run through something called the National Timber Transit Management System, the NTMS portal. This is the digital platform for all the clearances. But its development is lagging behind.
So the simplified process the rules are promising doesn't exist yet in a functional way.
Exactly. The delay in the portal creates a huge bureaucratic pause. The very mechanism designed to simplify the paperwork is itself causing the delay. It's a classic paradox of digital governance.
And what about the farmers on the ground, the people this is meant to help?
That's the second major barrier, digital literacy. Even when the NTMS portal is finally up and running, many small and marginal farmers, especially in remote areas, just don't have the technical skills to navigate it.
Right, so navigating online registration, applying for permits, securing transit passes, that can all be really complex and exclusionary?
It reintroduces the very friction and the need for a middleman that the rules were supposed to eliminate in the first place.
And you said there was a third point that was about uniformity, or rather the lack of it.
Correct. These are designated as model rules. That means they're recommendations. The actual adoption and how they're integrated will vary from state to state.
So you could end up with a patchwork of different rules across the country.
You could. If states adopt different interpretations or different timelines, or if they add their own extra layers of bureaucracy, then the national uniformity that's needed to make interstate timber transit easy will be severely compromised.
And that uncertainty kills investment. Farmers and timber businesses, they need predictability.
They do. So this one policy, it just beautifully showcases this constant tension between a central government's ambition and the decentralized regional reality of actually making it happen.
That constant negotiation between economic growth environmental rules, and just bureaucratic readiness. That's a thread we're definitely going to pull on as we move into some of the biggest structural challenges facing climate policy, both at home and abroad.
Okay, so if we zoom out now to the big picture, the recent Bonn climate talks in 2025, well, they painted a pretty clear picture of international deadlock, a very clear picture. The sources confirmed that despite this, ever-increasing sense of urgency about the climate crisis, there was a real failure to build consensus on the three big friction points.
Which are finance, equity, and adaptation.
Always those three. And finance is really the axis that the entire negotiation structure spins on. Developing countries need guaranteed, large-scale financial commitments to be able to transition their energy systems and build resilient infrastructure.
And the talks focused heavily on something called the Baku to Berlin Climate Finance Roadmap, or B2B.
Yes, which is an attempt to define the sheer scale of what's needed.
And what is that scale? What are the figures we're actually talking about here?
The necessity, according to that B2B roadmap, is just staggering. They're estimating something like $1.3 trillion to a year will be required by 2035.
A year.
Per year, primarily to support climate goals in the Global South. It's a massive leap from any of the current commitments, and it just shows you the size of the gap that international diplomacy is trying to bridge right now.
1.3 trillion a year is an almost unimaginable figure. But the sources suggest that even if the money was magically available, the talks would probably still stall because of this deadlock over equity. What's the fundamental conflict there?
It really boils down to one thing: historical responsibility.
Okay.
The group of less developed and middle-income countries, the LMDCs, they're demanding that the whole framework sticks to the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities.
Yes.
CBDR.
The idea that we're all in this together, but some are more responsible than others?
Exactly. It's the argument that developed nations, the ones who built their entire industrial economies on centuries of carbon emissions, must bear the primary financial burden. They historically caused the climate crisis, so they should pay for it. They want formal, accountable compensation.
And what's a counter-argument from the developed nations?
They're pushing for a more forward-looking, voluntary finance model. They push back against being held legally accountable for past emissions. They'd prefer mechanisms that encourage current, voluntary contributions from a much wider base of economies, including rapidly developing ones.
So they're resisting the idea of historical blame.
They are. And that refusal to accept historical responsibility is a core friction point that basically paralyzes any talk about structured, predictable financial mechanisms.
And it's not just about the sheer amount of money, is it? The quality of the finance is just as contentious. Whether it's a loan or a grant makes a huge difference.
That's absolutely critical. There's a strong, organized push for a big structural shift in climate finance, a shift toward predictable, non-debt instruments.
So grants rather than loans.
Yes, because when funding for climate adaptation comes mainly in the form of debt, vulnerable nations, especially small island developing states or the least developed countries, they're forced into these unsustainable debt cycles just to adapt to a crisis they did almost nothing to create.
You're paying to fix a problem someone else made, and you're going into debt to do it.
And then the transparency issues just make it all worse. Developed countries face constant scrutiny over discrepancies in how they report their climate finance contributions, which further erodes trust. The whole structure is asymmetrical. Who makes the commitments versus who actually shoulders the risk? And that remains the toughest obstacle to overcome. Hashtag #tag 2.2, the thermal plant exemption controversy.
So while the international community is stalling on finance for the future, we have to look at these major policy decisions being made right now that are going to dictate environmental quality for decades. The Union Environment Ministry recently released a policy that has, well, it's generated a lot of controversy.
It has. It's about exempting the vast majority of India's thermal power plants from installing mandatory pollution control systems.
This feels like a huge reversal.
It's a policy dilution of the highest order. The original mandate from 2015 required all thermal power plants to install something called flue gas desulfurization systems, or FGDs. Their job is to curb sulfur dioxide emissions.
And the new policy.
The new norms, which are based on advice from a scientific panel, effectively exempt a massive 78% of the country's thermal power plant units from that mandate.
78%. That's not a small tweak. That's a complete rollback for most of the fleet. What was the rationale given by the power sector and the ministry for such a major exemption?
Well, the industry cited two main reasons: cost and feasibility. Installing FGDs is a huge capital expenditure. It can cost hundreds of millions of dollars for a single plant. And the industry argued that retrofitting the entire aging fleet by the original deadline was just economically impossible without forcing massive increases in electricity tariffs.
So it's an economic trade-off. They're prioritizing the financial stability of the power sector over universal air quality compliance.
That's essentially what it is.
So how does the new framework decide which plants are in that 22% that do still have to install these systems?
They've created 3 categories based on a plant's location and the local pollution level. Category A makes up about 11% of the units. These are plants located within 10 kilometers of the national capital region or other big cities with populations over 1 million.
The most visible, most populated areas?
Right. Those plants must install FGDs, but even their deadline has been pushed back significantly to the end of 2027. Category B is another 11%, plants that are further out but still considered locally impactful. And the remaining 78%, that's Category C, are the ones that are implicitly exempted.
The thinking seems pretty clear then. Protect the immediate air quality and, let's be honest, the visibility in the biggest metropolitan areas, while essentially shifting the pollution burden onto the rest of the country.
And that is the absolute core concern for environmental advocates. We need to be crystal clear about why these systems are so necessary. We're talking about sulfur dioxide, SO. When you burn coal, SO is released. Then, through chemical reactions in the atmosphere, it leads to the formation of what we call secondary particulate matter. Studies like those from CEEW show that coal power plants contribute about 15% of the ambient PM2.5 in India.
And PM2.5 is that really fine particulate matter, the stuff that's so dangerous because it gets deep into your lungs and even into your bloodstream.
Precisely. The World Health Organization and other global health bodies have directly linked SO exposure to severe chronic respiratory and cardiovascular problems, things like exacerbated asthma, a higher risk of heart disease, and critically, childhood bronchitis.
So by exempting 78% of these plants, the policy basically guarantees that air quality standards will decline across huge parts of the country.
Yes. Across vast, non-metro, rural, and semi-urban populations, the Category C areas, where access to advanced healthcare is already much more limited. And of course, emissions don't just stay put, they can travel over 200 kilometers. So this single policy choice has these far-reaching long-term health consequences for the majority of the population. Hashtag 2.3, managing disaster geographies.
These huge structural policy challenges are then compounded by the inherent geological risks in India's geography. We see the effects of climate change amplifying these natural hazards, especially in seismically sensitive places. Let's start with a really foundational understanding of one of the most terrifying events, the tsunami.
Right, and the first thing to clear up is that they are commonly, and very inaccurately, called tidal waves. They have absolutely nothing to do with the tides.
So what are they? Where does the physics come from?
Their physics comes entirely from sudden, massive energy displacement. A tsunami is generated by a sudden vertical displacement of the seabed. It's almost always caused by a huge event, a subsea earthquake, a massive underwater landslide, or a big volcanic eruption. This vertical shift pushes or pulls the entire column of water above it.
And that displacement is what starts the chain reaction. So what happens once that column of water starts moving out in the deep ocean?
This is where it gets counterintuitive. In the deep ocean, where the water is maybe several kilometers deep, the wave travels with terrifying speed. We're talking 800 to 900 kilometers per hour, faster than a commercial jet.
Wow.
But this is the key. The wave height at this stage is tiny, maybe 30 to 50 centimeters. It would be completely imperceptible to a ship passing over it. The energy is spread out across an immense wavelength, sometimes 200 kilometers from one crest to the next. It's just pure kinetic energy, moving unseen beneath the surface.
And then you have the most iconic, but also the most misinterpreted warning sign, the drawback effect.
Yes. This happens if the trough of the wave, the lowest point, arrives at the coast before the crest. It dramatically pulls the water away from the shore, exposing huge stretches of the seabed, fish flapping on the sand.
And people tragically think it's just an extremely low tide and walk out to look.
They do. They're tempted to walk out onto this exposed seabed, not realizing that it's the signal for the imminent arrival of the devastating wave crest right behind it.
And that rapid transition from drawback to impact, that's the moment of maximum danger.
Absolutely. This is what we call wave amplification. As the wave races into shallow coastal waters, friction with the seabed slows it down dramatically, from 800 kilometers an hour to maybe 50, but the energy and the massive volume of water behind it has to go somewhere. It compresses. The momentum is still there.
So the height of the wave just skyrockets.
It surges, from a barely visible 1-meter height to 10 meters or even more. This immense column of water then rushes ashore, carrying colossal speed, pressure, and debris. And crucially, tsunamis are never a single wave. They are a series of waves, and the first one is rarely the largest. The danger persists for hours.
Moving from the sea up to the mountains, the Himalayan region is facing its own escalating threat, a very localized one: glacial lake outburst floods, or GLOFs.
Yes. The warming climate is melting glaciers faster, and that's creating these unstable lakes dammed up only by loose rock and ice, or moraine.
So what is the National Disaster Management Authority, the NDMA, doing to try and get ahead of this risk?
The NDMA has moved very decisively toward proactive risk reduction. They're using a comprehensive 5-point strategy. Step 1 was a massive hazard assessment, which has already identified 195 high-risk glacial lakes across the entire Himalayan chain.
And what's step 2?
Step 2 is intensive fieldwork. In 2024 alone, they sent multi-institutional expeditions to 40 of these highest-risk lakes across states like Ladakh, Uttarakhand, Himachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and Arunachal Pradesh.
What are these expeditions actually doing on the ground? Are they just monitoring the lakes?
It's much more than monitoring. They're doing detailed bathymetric surveys to measure the exact volume of the lake, geotechnical analysis of the moraine dams to see how stable they are, and they're installing critical early warning infrastructure, things like automatic water level warning systems.
And in the really remote areas?
In places that are too remote for immediate automation, they use groups like the ITBP, the Indo-Tibetan Border Police. They act as trained, manual sentinels, providing that critical real-time information for immediate downstream warnings.
Speaking of geological hotspots far to the northeast, there was also the recent eruption of the Klitschevskoy volcano.
Ah yes, Klitschevskoy, or Klitschevskaya Sopka. It is a true giant of the Northern Hemisphere. It's the tallest active volcano in the region, standing at 4,750 meters.
And it's a stratovolcano.
It is, characterized by those classic steep slopes and highly explosive eruptions. It's on Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula, which is a seismically turbulent place. It's part of the Ring of Fire and has 127 volcanoes in total, with 29 of them currently active. It just underscores the constant geological stress in that part of the world.
And finally, we saw a much more local story, but one that shows how local hydrology and intense weather can create immediate hazards. I'm talking about the rescue operation near the Kalu River.
Right. This incident involved the rescue of over 300 trekkers in the Malshej Ghat region after flash floods. They were triggered by very intense, very localized rainfall. It's a stark reminder of the dangers inherent in popular ecotourism spots that cross these monsoon-fed, steep river systems.
And the Kalu River, its geography makes it particularly prone to this.
It does. It originates in the Kalsubai Harishandra God Wildlife Sanctuary, and it's in a steep Ghat section. That means it's prone to these incredibly rapid increases in water level, turning what was a scenic trail into a life-threatening hazard almost instantly.
And there was a note in the source material about the river having a larger hydrological impact on the whole region.
Yes, and this points to a much bigger water management challenge. Experts have noted that the Kalu River historically diverts water that would have flowed into the upper Mula River. So while this excess monsoon water often just drains unused into the Arabian Sea, it's consequently depriving upstream drought-prone regions like Ahmednagar and Marathwada of rainwater they desperately need.
So this local flash flood incident unexpectedly highlights a systemic regional stress point around water management.
Exactly. It reinforces the need for better infrastructure to manage and transfer those water resources more effectively. It connects immediate local danger to long-term regional resource management.
It's a perfect link. We've assessed the macro-level policy deadlocks and the big geological risks. Now let's explore how science is actively fighting back against disease and trying to improve health equity.
One of the most critical public health priorities, especially in tropical and subtropical regions, is managing vector-borne diseases, and dengue fever is right at the top of that list.
It's a huge problem. But India is making some massive strides with its first indigenous dengue vaccine.
A huge collaboration between Panacea Biotech and the Indian Council of Medical Research, the ICMR. It's a really significant milestone for national health security.
What is it that makes designing an effective dengue vaccine so technically difficult? I know it's been a challenge for decades.
The difficulty lies in the virus itself. Dengue isn't just one virus. It's caused by 4 distinct viral serotypes: DNV1, 2, 3, and 4. So the vaccine has to be what we call tetravalent.
Meaning it has to effectively immunize you against all four of them at the same time?
simultaneously. And the major challenge is ensuring balanced immunity. Because if a vaccine only gives you partial protection, say against one strain, a later infection by a different strain can lead to a much more severe, sometimes life-threatening condition called dengue hemorrhagic fever.
So a bad vaccine could actually make things worse.
It's a phenomenon called antibody-dependent enhancement. The antibodies from the first infection can actually help the second different virus cause a more severe illness. It's a huge hurdle.
So the vaccine has to induce really robust protection against all four strains at once to avoid that risk. What stage is this new indigenous vaccine at right now?
It's currently undergoing large-scale, multi-center phase 3 clinical trials. It's a live attenuated vaccine.
Meaning it uses weakened versions of the viruses.
Weakened versions of all four viral strains. It's enough to safely provoke a strong immune response without causing any severe illness. It's a very common and effective strategy for achieving long-lasting immunity.
And tell us about the scope of these phase 3 trials. This is what determines if it's ready for mass deployment.
The trials are immense, and that really reflects the scale of the public health need. They've already enrolled over 8,000 participants across 20 centers nationwide in critical areas like Pune, Chennai, and Delhi. The target is to reach 10,000 candidates.
And how long will they be monitored for?
The participants will be followed very closely for 2 years after their vaccination. This is to determine the long-term efficacy, how long the immune response lasts, and of course its safety across different age groups. This vaccine is absolutely critical for reducing the high risk of hospitalization that comes with repeat infections, especially for children in endemic zones. Hashtag tag 3.2 advanced diagnostics and targeted therapy. So moving from mass prevention to highly personalized treatment, we're seeing these incredible advances in nuclear medicine, specifically in the use of radioactive iodine-131 for thyroid conditions.
Nuclear medicine always sounds so futuristic, but this technique is actually surprisingly old, isn't it?
It has very deep historical roots. The concept of using radioactive isotopes for therapy, a process we now call theranostics, which combines therapy and diagnostics, was first proposed by a scientist named Saul Hertz way back in 1936.
Wow.
And the key isotope itself, iodine-131, or La, was discovered by Glenn Seaborg and John Livingood in 1938. That foundational discovery really launched the entire modern era of targeted nuclear medicine.
What is it about I-131 that makes it such a perfect agent for treating the thyroid specifically?
It's all about biological specificity. The thyroid gland is the only part of the body that's a dedicated factory for absorbing and using iodine. It needs it to produce hormones.
Okay, so it's a natural target.
It's a natural target. So when a patient ingests the radioactive iodine, which is usually just a liquid or a small capsule, the hyperactive thyroid tissue just gobbles it up. It selectively absorbs the eye while the rest of the body just clears it out rapidly. That selective absorption is the key to its precision.
And once it's been absorbed, how does it actually destroy the target cells without damaging the healthy tissue around it?
The radioactive iodine emits something called beta particles. And these particles travel a very, very short distance, just a few millimeters within the tissue. This means the radiation dose is incredibly localized.
A tiny targeted strike.
Exactly. It destroys only the hyperactive thyroid cells that are causing hyperthyroidism, or the cancerous cells in certain thyroid cancers, while sparing all the surrounding healthy tissues and organs. And the dosage is meticulously customized for each patient, making it a minimally invasive but highly effective treatment.
That is a fascinating application of physics to biology. Now let's talk about taking this kind of advanced science and using it to address some severe health equity gaps. Gujarat recently launched India's first state-level tribal genome sequencing project.
This project is so important because it addresses a long-standing deficit in medical science. Tribal populations often have very unique genetic profiles and a higher prevalence of certain genetic diseases, but they are significantly underrepresented in all of the global genomic databases.
So our medical knowledge is based on a very narrow slice of humanity.
A very narrow slice. This project aims to change that by sequencing the genomes of diverse tribal groups across 17 districts in Gujarat.
And what's the primary goal of creating this new reference database?
The core objective is really twofold. First, it's to build a reliable reference genetic database. This will allow doctors and researchers to understand the unique genetic markers and disease susceptibilities within these specific communities.
And second part.
The second and most important part is that it enables early detection and tailored treatment protocols for these devastating genetic diseases that disproportionately affect these populations, things like sickle cell anemia and various forms of thalassemia.
So instead of using these generalized medical models that were developed from, say, European or other non-tribal populations, this project allows for highly customized medical care.
It fundamentally shifts the paradigm of healthcare access, and it works to reduce those health equity gaps. It's a move away from just treating symptoms and toward proactive, genetically informed intervention. Hashtag tag tag 3.3, the microbiome and functional food.
Okay, to wrap up our health section, let's talk about a topic that sort of bridges ancient fermentation practices with some really cutting-edge functional science. The power of the gut microbiome and functional foods like kombucha.
The gut microbiome is one of those areas of science that's just exploding. It's now recognized as a critical regulator of, well, almost everything, from our mental health to our metabolic function.
And kombucha, the fermented tea, is a good example of a functional food that's being studied for this.
It is. It's based on a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, the SQOBY, and it's an excellent example of a food being studied for its ability to positively modulate this internal ecosystem.
A recent study focused specifically on its effect on the gut microbiota in people who are struggling with obesity. What did they find was at work?
The study showed that regular consumption of the fermented tea seemed to positively rebalance the gut's microbial composition. Specifically, it significantly increased the population of several beneficial bacterial strains.
Okay, which specific strains were positively impacted?
Researchers noted increases in bacteria from the families Akkermansiaceae and Prevotalaceae.
And what do they do?
Well, Akkermansiaceae is widely studied, and it's been strongly linked to having an improved gut barrier integrity and enhanced insulin sensitivity. Both of those are critical factors in managing metabolic disorders. Prevotalaceae are also associated with healthier carbohydrate metabolism profiles.
And on the flip side, did it suppress any of the microbes that are linked to metabolic problems?
It did. The study found a corresponding reduction in some of the harmful strains, like Ruminococcus novis and Doria. These are strongly associated with inflammation, obesity, and other related metabolic disorders.
So it's a two-pronged attack, promoting the good and reducing the bad.
And there's more. The phenolic compounds that are naturally present in the tea were also found to stimulate mucus production in the gut lining. This strengthens the physical barrier of the gut and helps reduce inflammation. So it's a multi-pronged benefit, supporting not just the microbial population, but the physical health of the gut lining itself.
That neatly synthesizes our three major themes today, doesn't it? Whether it's using forensic science to protect megafauna, complex physics for precise cancer therapy, or leveraging natural fermentation for metabolic health, it seems technology and a really detailed scientific understanding are offering increasingly targeted solutions across the board. Hashtag outro. What an enormous scope of material we've synthesized today. We've seen these really impressive data-driven successes in conservation, epitomized by, the genetic fingerprinting used to protect rhinos and the sheer scale of the tiger population recovery.
But this success, it exists in such stark contrast to the systemic policy compromises we discussed. That tension between necessary economic growth and ecological survival is just so palpable in that controversial policy exempting 78% of the coal fleet from pollution controls.
A decision that will fundamentally alter the health trajectory for millions of people who live outside of the big metropolitan areas.
Exactly. And at the very same time, you have these rapid advancements in health tech, from the Indigenous Dengue vaccine and phase 3 trials to that pioneering Gujarat tribal genome project, and they promise increasingly tailored, precise treatments for communities that have been historically underserved by generalized medicine. They're directly addressing these acute health equity gaps.
So the scale of the challenges, from trying to mitigate sudden Himalayan GLOFs to ensuring every citizen, regardless of where they live, has clean air and genetically informed healthcare. It just means that every single policy choice has a profound, cascading environmental or health implication that really can't be ignored.
So what does this all mean? I think the ultimate test of India's capacity for sustained development isn't just about hitting energy targets or growing its economy. It's whether it can simultaneously manage these immense geological and climate risks while ensuring that foundational resources like air quality and local water are protected for future generations.
Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to contemplate.
It does. And the question is this. If India focuses intently on leveraging biotechnology and functional foods, maybe mass-producing genetically enhanced crops and using advanced farming techniques to ensure food security, how will the current policy of exempting most coal plants from installing ancillary pollution controls ultimately impact the air and water quality of the very land and the health of the very farmers who are producing that food?
Can health and food security ever truly be decoupled from air and water quality?
That is the question.
It's certainly a thought worth dwelling on. We've traced the flow today from global climate deadlocks all the way down to a microscopic bacteria in a glass of tea. For a deeper dive, we encourage you to start exploring the complex intersection of local hydrology and climate change adaptation, especially concerning vulnerable resources and regions like the Kalu River Basin, where policy and geology meet so dramatically. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive. Welcome back to The Deep Dive. This is part 4 of our current mission, where we're taking this deep stack of policy briefs, statistical surveys, and some pretty cutting-edge science reporting.
And we're turning it into something you can actually use, synthesize knowledge, really.
Exactly, just for you. Our sources today are, well, they're pretty dense. They range from these really high-level policy papers, like the WHO Roadmap on AI, all the way down to the hard numbers from NSSO surveys.
And some really stark projections from the Lancet on disease burdens. Our job today, really, is to connect those big, ambitious policy goals with the, let's say, the complicated, sometimes brutal reality you see in the raw data.
That's the core of it. We're covering 3 main areas. First, we're looking at this sort of silent crisis brewing in social health, specifically India's demographic shifts and the institutions trying to keep up.
Right. Then we'll get into the widening gaps in economic and digital inequality, and we're going to look past the usual metrics to find out what's really going on.
And finally, and this is where it gets really interesting for me, we'll explore India's strategic pivot towards AI. And not just in tech hubs, but in traditional medicine, in public infrastructure. It's a whole national strategy.
And if you want a hook to get us started, think about this. For decades, the story of India has been the youth bulge. But what we're seeing now is a rapid preparation for an unavoidable future.
An aging population.
A massive and rapidly aging population. And that one demographic fact dictates so much of the policy we're seeing today.
Yeah, that shift from focusing on youth to seniors, it changes everything. Healthcare, Social Security, the works. Okay, let's unpack this silent crisis and see what the sources are actually projecting.
So that demographic time bomb, as you called it, is, well, it's definitely ticking. And the scale is almost difficult to comprehend.
Oh.
The analysis from UNFPA India, it's monumental. By 2050, 20% of the entire Indian population will be 60 or older.
20%. What does that work out to in actual numbers?
319 million people.
Wait, stop there. 319 million. That's almost the entire population of the United States.
Exactly.
So we're not just talking about policy tweaks. We're talking about fundamentally redesigning society around a group that historically hasn't been the main focus.
Precisely. And what's really concerning isn't just the sheer number of people. It's the nature of the disease burden they're projected to carry. The data points to an impending crisis in neurological and lifestyle disorders, the kind that need specialized long-term care.
Okay, so what are the specific projections from the Lancet that the sources are citing?
The figures for 2024, they show this massive surge coming. Parkinson's disease, for example, a really complex neurological disorder, is projected to rise by 168%.
168%.
And even more acutely, dementia, which requires just immense support, both from families and institutions, that's projected to rise by 200%.
A 200% increase in dementia that's terrifying. Especially when you think about the strain on family caregivers. I mean, these aren't just numbers. These are millions of families that are going to need continuous advanced care, and often without the support systems in place.
That kind of increase demands immediate structural preparation. And this brings us right to a concept the PARAKH study emphasizes, which is functional longevity.
Functional longevity, so not just living longer.
Exactly. The goal can't just be to extend life expectancy anymore. The goal has to shift to ensuring that those extra years are high-quality, independent years with minimal disability.
Yeah.
Because if you live longer but with a high degree of disability, the burden on society just becomes exponential.
And within that, I imagine the burden isn't shared equally, is it? What about gender?
Not at all. There's a critical gender disparity here. Women consistently outlive men, which seems like a positive, but they face significantly higher disability-adjusted life years, dailies.
Oh, hey, dailies. We should probably break that down for you because it's so critical here.
Right. So a daily is a metric. It represents the total number of years lost to either dying early or the years you live with a disability or disease. It's a measure of the total disease burden.
So what you're saying is women live longer, but they spend more of that extra time dealing with debilitating health conditions.
That's the tragedy of it. They spend a much larger proportion of their advanced years coping with these conditions. And that means we need gender-sensitive geriatric policies, things that address chronic pain, mobility, the specific care older women need.
So we have a population getting older, facing these costly diseases, and women are disproportionately affected. How are they supposed to pay for all this? What's the economic support system look like?
And this is where you see the cracks. The elder dependency ratio is putting huge pressure on healthcare budgets, but also on the formal pension system. The NSSO 75th round has a truly sobering figure on this.
What does it say?
Only 28% of the elderly population have any form of formal pension.
Only 28%, so that means a staggering 72%. Nearly 3/4 of this massive elderly population. They lack a reliable, structured income.
Exactly, which forces them into one of two spots. Either keep working in the informal sector, often in strenuous jobs, or, more often, they become financially dependent on their families who are already strained.
And that's just not sustainable when you factor in a 200% rise in dementia cases.
Not at all. And the institutional response isn't keeping up. The healthcare access gaps you mentioned.
Yeah, what were the numbers on that?
It's systemic. A Ministry of Health survey showed that dedicated geriatric services are critically limited. Less than 5% of primary health centers, the PHCs, which are the first point of contact for most people,
Less than 5%.
less than 5% have dedicated geriatric outpatient departments, or OPDs.
That reveals a huge gap in the system. If your first point of contact for healthcare is totally unprepared for the diseases of the future dementia, Parkinson's, then the whole system is set up to fail.
It's a domino effect. Chronic conditions go undetected, care becomes reactive instead of preventative, and the burden shifts entirely to expensive hospitals or, more often than not, right back onto the family.
This really redefines what a health crisis is. It's not just about infectious diseases anymore. But, when we talk about social health, we also have to think about the next generation.
Absolutely. Support for vulnerable youth is the other side of that coin. The sources mention the National Institute of Public Cooperation and Child Development, NIPCCD, and its new regional center in Ranchi.
And why is that center so important for social well-being?
Because it's focused on capacity building. It's about training the trainers, the frontline workers for schemes like ICDS and POSHAN. Their job includes research on really nuanced issues like gender, mental health, adolescent welfare, things that often get overlooked.
So it's about decentralizing the expertise, making sure policy isn't just top-down.
Precisely. This one center serves over 7 lakh field workers in its region. By giving them better local access to training and counseling, you empower them to handle complex family situations on the ground.
And you can see the results, right? I mean, targeted programs for youth can have a direct impact on those big structural issues like financial agency or early marriage.
Project Manzil in Rajasthan is a perfect example of that. It focused on skills training for young women aged 18 to 21. And the results were tangible. They trained 28,000 young women, and of those, 16,000 got jobs.
And that employment is the key. It's the lever.
It is. That financial agency, it's not just about income. It gives these young women autonomy, a voice in their own life decisions. The source is clear that this is crucial for delaying early marriages, which is a major public health goal.
So there's a measurable link. Skills lead to a job, which leads to financial agency, which leads to better life outcomes like delaying marriage. It shows how investing in dignity directly impacts social outcomes.
And it reinforces the whole approach. You need universal access to reproductive health rights. You need to expand girls' secondary education. You need jobs with dignity. All these things have to work together to build a support system for the young people who will eventually be caring for those 319 million elderly.
Okay, that gives us a clear, a challenging picture of social health. Let's pivot now to the economy, and specifically how inequality is shaping society. When we talk about this, the Gini coefficient is the metric everyone throws around, but the sources are saying we need to be really careful with that number.
Oh, absolutely. What's fascinating here is understanding the limits of these aggregate measures. The Gini is popular because it's convenient, one number to summarize everything, but its very nature means it hides the most extreme concentrations of wealth, at the very top and at the very bottom.
So it gives you a general vibe for inequality, but it misses the details in the extremes where the real drama is. It's a good average, but a bad descriptor.
Exactly. Think of it visually with the Lorenz curve. The Gini just measures the gap between perfect equality and the actual curve. But when wealth is ridiculously concentrated in the top 0.1%, the Gini number might only move a tiny bit. because it's not a large percentage of the population.
Even if they hold a massive chunk of the wealth.
Exactly. And it also fails to show the sheer number of people struggling in the bottom 50%.
So just relying on the Gini gives us a dangerously incomplete picture. It almost normalizes that extreme concentration. What else should we be looking at?
The data has to be supplemented with metrics that are designed to catch those extremes. You need to look at the top 1% wealth share. That's probably the most revealing. And things like P90, P10 ratios, which compare the wealth of someone at the 90th percentile to someone at the 10th. And finally, you have indices like the Thiel index, which is just mathematically more sensitive to what's happening at the tails.
So if we combine all that and accept that inequality is high and concentrated at the top, what does that actually mean for the economy, for people's daily lives?
The implications are huge. First, it kills economic mobility. For that bottom 50%, upward movement is so limited that your socioeconomic class basically becomes a trap.
And it also impacts the whole economy, right? Aggregate demand. You mentioned that the spending habits of the ultra-rich become a systemic drag. Let's unpack that.
Right. This is about the marginal propensity to consume. People at the bottom have to spend almost everything they earn just to get by. But the ultra-rich, they save so much of their additional income. The sources imply that their savings don't translate into proportional spending or investment that actually stimulates the wider economy.
So it suppresses demand for mass market goods.
It does. It leads to these sluggish growth cycles that mostly benefit capital owners, not labor. Basically, when wealth is that concentrated, it acts like a bottleneck on the velocity of money. It's an economic inefficiency.
And a political one, too.
Oh, absolutely.
What?
High disparity fuels social fragmentation, resentment, political instability. It erodes trust.
Let's dive into one specific area where this shows up, the labor market. We're seeing this massive shift towards contractualization.
This is a huge trend happening right now. The data shows contract labor in manufacturing has doubled, hitting 40.7% by 2022-23. And this isn't just in small firms. It's across the board, even in big established companies.
And this flexibility for the company comes with a demonstrable wage penalty for the worker.
It does. Overall, contract workers earn about 14.5% less than regular workers. But here's the shocking part from the sources. In large enterprises, the very firms that are supposed to offer security, that wage gap widens to 31%.
31%.
Think about that. Doing the same job, often right next to a permanent employee, but getting paid almost a third less just because of your contract.
That's shocking. But if firms are doing this just to cut costs, you mentioned there's a productivity paradox. It's actually not more efficient.
It's completely counterintuitive. The sources find a 31% lower productivity in firms that are intensive on contract labor. The assumption is cheaper labor means lower costs, but the reality is cheaper labor often means less training, higher turnover, zero commitment.
So the skills don't develop, morale is low.
Right. So the cost savings from cutting wages by 71% are often completely wiped out by a productivity loss of the same size. It hurts the firm in the long run, and it definitely hurts the worker immediately.
So what about the regulations? Weren't there reforms supposed to formalize this?
The Industrial Relations Code of 2020 was meant to bring in fixed-term hiring, giving firms flexibility, but also giving workers benefits. But those codes are stalled. They're waiting for states to adopt them. And in that vacuum, you get this unregulated expansion of non-permanent jobs. The source calls it disguised informalization.
What does that mean, disguised informalization?
It means permanent, essential jobs are being shifted to these precarious contracts that have no benefits, no job security, no social security. So you're doing formal work in a factory, but under informal conditions. It's undoing decades of progress.
Okay, so we have this structural pressure leading to lower wages and productivity. Now let's move to the most modern form of inequality, the digital divide. We assume because UPI is everywhere that this divide is closing.
That's a really misleading assumption. The digital divide is way more complex than just having a connection. You have to think about it in three gaps. The access gap, so devices and connectivity. Then the usage gap, what you're using it for.
Consumption versus creation.
Exactly. And finally, the skill gap, the ability to actually use tech productively.
So let's start with the good news. Is there any sign of digital empowerment happening?
Yes, there are some positive shifts. The NSS data shows the rural gender gap in overall internet usage is decreasing. So more women in rural areas are getting online, which is a major step.
But where are the gaps still persisting? Give us the numbers.
It starts with ownership. That dictates autonomy. Only 56.9% of rural young women own their own mobile phones, compared to 81.2% of men.
And that's a huge difference. Access without ownership limits your privacy, your autonomy.
Completely. And then there's the skill deficit. Usage is so heavily skewed to passive consumption. Only 22.9% of youth have ever drafted a document digitally. Just think about that. If you can't draft a professional document, you're locked out of so many formal jobs, even if you have a smartphone.
And that lack of skill and autonomy must spill over into other areas, like civic and financial literacy.
It does. There's a really worrying civic tech awareness gap. Only about 27% of youth know how to file a cybercrime complaint, and that number drops below 22% for rural women. If you can't navigate the digital world safely, you are disproportionately vulnerable.
And what about financial fluency? We all use UPI.
UPI adoption is incredible, but true digital banking literacy is weak. Only about 19% of youth use both UPI and net banking. So the infrastructure is there, but the ability to use it productively, safely, comprehensively, that lags way behind.
It's clear that these deep structural challenges demand equally sophisticated solutions. And that brings us to AI. This is where it gets really interesting, especially integrating AI into traditional medicine.
This is a major area where India is actually driving the global conversation. The sources detail the WHO roadmap on AI in traditional medicine. It's a global strategy for integrating AI into systems like Ayurveda and Unani safely and ethically.
Why is that so significant? What's a problem AI is solving here?
It's about data standardization and personalization. Traditional medicine is highly personalized. It relies on complex, often qualitative data pulse diagnosis, body constitution. The WHO roadmap provides a standard framework for using AI to manage all that diverse data, to enhance diagnostics, and to do it ethically.
So it's not just applying AI, it's about standardizing the inputs so the AI outputs are reliable and safe when you're dealing with ancient practices.
Exactly. And India's role was central. The Ministry of AYUSH led the proposal. And this is globally significant because it's the first initiative of its kind under the WHO's Global Initiative on AI for Health. It builds on India's existing work, like the Traditional Knowledge Digital Library.
That's a powerful idea, using 21st century tech to optimize knowledge from millennia ago. Now, AI is also being embedded in physical infrastructure, right? Like the railways.
The safety implications here are immense. Indian Railways is deploying AI-powered machine vision-based inspection systems, or MVIS. It's for detecting defects in the trains themselves.
How does that work differently than, a person looking at it?
Well, traditional inspection is manual, slow, and prone to human error. MVIS operates in real time as the train is moving. It has high-resolution cameras on the trackside that capture detailed images of critical components, the wheels, suspension, undercarriage.
And the AI interprets those images on the fly.
Yes. Computer vision software analyzes them instantly, looking for tiny cracks, loose bolts, anything that could lead to a failure. It moves inspection from a slow, periodic process to a high-speed, real-time safety system.
And this idea of bringing AI to the field, it also applies to agriculture. The sources mention the Google DeepMind AIM-Ed API. That sounds technical, but I assume the applications are very practical.
Very practical. The Agricultural Multispectral Event Detection API is all about giving granular, actionable intelligence to the farm sector. It moves beyond just generalized satellite images.
So what kind of insights does it provide?
It can accurately identify crop types, assess plant health. But the key is the historical data. It can provide up to 3 years of cropping history for a specific field.
So this is useful not just for the farmer, but for, say, a bank that's giving out a loan.
Precisely. It empowers rural lending. Banks can more accurately assess risk based on yield predictions and land management history. It also helps with climate risk analysis. It's about using technology to reduce the financial uncertainty that plagues rural economies.
Let's turn to another high-tech application, this one focused on healthcare equity, the Gujarat Tribal Genome Sequencing Project. This sounds like an effort to make sure personalized medicine reaches everyone.
It's a really profound step towards health equity. The project is building a detailed reference genetic database specifically for tribal populations across 17 districts. And this isn't just research. It addresses a fundamental inequity in global healthcare data.
Why is a specialized tribal database so necessary?
Because most generic genetic databases are heavily skewed towards European populations. They lack representation from specific Indian ethnic and tribal groups, so treatments or diagnostics developed using that generic data might be less effective for indigenous groups.
So the goal is to create tailored treatments for diseases that are prevalent in these specific communities.
That's exactly the aim. to enable early detection and personalized treatment for things like sickle cell anemia, thalassemia, certain cancers that are more common in these communities. By understanding their unique genetic profiles, you can offer customized medical care and close a significant equity gap using high science.
We also saw a major milestone in public health with the dengue vaccine trials.
Yes, dengue is one of India's most widespread and dangerous illnesses. The vaccine, developed by Panacea Biotech with ICMR, is tetravalent, so it protects against all 4 known strains. This is a huge national priority.
And what's significant about these phase 3 trials?
The sheer scale. They're enrolling over 8,000 people across 20 centers. It's a massive indigenous effort to develop a local solution to a perennial crisis. If it's successful, it will be crucial for protecting children who are at higher risk and reducing severe secondary infections.
And before we conclude, let's go back to the railways for a second. The Railone app sounds like a massive effort to unify the passenger experience.
It's the digitization of convenience, really. It's developed by CREIS, the Center for Railway Information Systems, and it's designed to be an all-in-one app for passengers.
What services does it pull together?
Everything. Unreserved ticket booking, live train tracking, e-catering, porter services, even last-mile taxi booking, all with a unified login. And they're incentivizing it. You get a 3% discount if you use the digital R-Wallet.
And the scale of the backend system must be insane.
The upgraded system is projected to handle 1.5 lakh ticket bookings and 40 lakh inquiries per minute.
40 lakh inquiries a minute. That's a technological challenge few systems in the world face.
And if you look across all of these initiatives, the WHO Roadmap for Traditional Medicine, the MBIS Safety Systems, the Genomics Project, the underlying theme is using advanced tech to manage the inherent scale and complexity of India's demands.
We've covered a huge amount of ground here, connecting policy with the reality and the data. We started with those silent demographic shifts, dementia and Parkinson's looming large, and the urgent need for better geriatric care and pensions, which, still cover less than 30% of the elderly.
Then we dissected the economy, showing how measures like the Gini coefficient can hide the real story of inequality, which is that soaring top 1% wealth concentration. And we saw the injustice in the labor market, with contract labor doubling and workers facing that punitive 31% wage penalty.
And we wrapped with AI emerging as a strategic tool, not just a piece of tech. A tool for managing traditional health and physical infrastructure. But even there, we saw the digital divide persisting. Access is up, but ownership and, crucially, productive skills are lagging, especially for rural women.
And the unifying theme across all of it is institutional effectiveness. It's the constant need to refine and recalibrate policy to manage this complexity. Whether it's getting geriatric care into that less than 5% of PHCs, or regulating wages, or embedding ethics into AI, the challenge is always making it work on the ground.
Which brings us right back to that digital divide. A major challenge is the content itself. The sources note that even with efforts like the POSHAN project supporting over 35 languages, most of the really valuable digital content is still heavily English-centric.
That is so critical, because if digital literacy really is the key to escaping the inequality spiral, then we have to ensure that the massive digital growth we see, all the UPI users, all the training, translates into productive digital creation, not just passive consumption, especially for rural women and marginalized youth.
That's the essential leap, isn't it? Moving beyond just using a smartphone to watch videos, to using it to draft a business plan, access government schemes, or run a small enterprise.
Exactly. The tools are there. The ability to use them to create economic value is what's lagging. So here's the final thought we'll leave you with. Considering these persistent ownership and skill gaps, what fundamental shift in our educational and digital infrastructure beyond just providing basic connectivity is needed to foster that productive digital creation over passive consumption? How do we build the systems that actively encourage and reward the leap from being a viewer to being a creator, and in doing so, truly leverage India's demographic dividend?
A compelling and complex challenge for you to mull over. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you feel thoroughly informed and ready to unpack the next layer.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. And wow, you've provided us with a profoundly deep stack of source material this time around.
It's a lot, isn't it?
It's not just a collection of reports. This is, it feels like a comprehensive, high-resolution snapshot of the entire policy and societal landscape as we head into the back half of 2025.
I agree. We're talking about everything from these really deep structural challenges, demographics, education.
All the way to subtle shifts in economic policy, and then some critical environmental wins and, well, some setbacks too.
It truly is a vast amount of ground to cover. I mean, you can see the relevance for GS1, 2, and 3 running through this entire data set.
Exactly. So our mission today feels absolutely critical. We're not just here to summarize these reports for you.
No, not at all. The goal is to move beyond just the isolated facts and really focus on those high-yield, high-impact nuggets of knowledge. We're synthesizing this data.
We're connecting the dots.
We are. We want to understand the interconnectedness of all these issues, to really see the why behind these crucial policies and reports that are shaping the nation right now.
That's it. This is the ultimate consolidation phase. It lets you go from a raw pile of articles to a synthesized understanding of the most critical challenges facing us. We need the details, for sure, but we also need the context that makes those details stick.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we have to dive straight into what is maybe the single most significant long-term structural shift underway.
India's looming demographic reality.
And the profound challenge of achieving genuinely healthy aging.
Let's do it.
When most people outside the country, and often even inside, think of India's demographic story, the focus is always on the youth bulge.
Demographic dividend, yeah.
The celebrated demographic dividend. But that huge youth cohort is aging, and they are aging fast. The reports you sent over make the sheer scale of this impending shift, well, is terrifyingly clear.
It's a transition that demands our full attention right now. It's a demographic transformation on a scale that, very few countries have ever navigated this rapidly.
So give us the hard numbers. What are we looking at?
Okay, so to grasp the numbers, the UNFPA Indian analysis says that by the year 2050, 20% of the entire Indian population will be 60 or older.
20%. What does that translate to in actual people?
That translates to approximately 319 million people. And to put that into perspective for you,
Please do.
that is roughly equivalent to adding the entire current population of the United States to India's senior citizen category.
In just over 25 years.
In just 25 years. This isn't just a challenge, it's a foundational redesign of our social contract, our infrastructure, our budget allocations, everything.
And what does that huge increase in the elderly population mean specifically for the healthcare system? Because as we always discuss, extending life expectancy is, well, it's pretty meaningless if those extra years are just spent chronically ill or disabled.
That's the core of it.
Yeah.
We need quality years. And that links directly to the projected disease burden, which is, frankly, staggering. The Lancet, in its 2024 analysis, focused on age-related neurological disorders.
Which are complex and expensive to manage?
Extremely. We are looking at Parkinson's disease projected to rise by 168%. And even more concerning, dementia is projected to rise by a colossal 200%.
200%.
Yes. This fundamentally reorients our entire public health infrastructure. We have to shift resources, training, policy focus, everything away from just fighting communicable diseases or maternal care towards managing these complex chronic geriatric conditions that require long-term specialized care, often for decades.
You mentioned a concept in the notes that's crucial for policy planners here. DALYs, disability-adjusted life years. Can you unpack that for us?
Okay.
Because just saying life expectancy doesn't really capture the problem, but DALYs do.
That is precisely the crucial distinction we have to make. DALYs are a vital metric because they measure the total burden of a disease. It's expressed as the number of years lost due to ill health, disability, or early death.
So it's two things combined.
Right, it combines two components. The years of life lost from dying too early, and the years lived with disability. So it's not just measuring how long you live, it's measuring the quality and the functionality of that life.
And the reports highlighted a gender disparity here, which was really interesting.
Yes, a critical one. While women generally outlive men, that's a global phenomenon, they face significantly higher DALYs. Meaning that although they might live longer, they spend a greater proportion of those later years in a state of ill health or disability. They're struggling with chronic conditions, often without adequate financial support.
So this disparity demands some really targeted, gender-sensitive policy interventions.
It has to. Things that focus specifically on chronic disease management and mental health support for older women.
Okay, so the demand for specialized care is just going to explode, especially for women. What about the supply side? The structural capacity? Where are the current systemic gaps in meeting this massive future demand?
Well, the structural gaps are alarmingly prevalent, especially at the ground level where most people actually access healthcare.
You mean at the primary healthcare centers?
Exactly. We learned from a Ministry of Health survey that less than 5% of all PHCs, which are the backbone of rural and semi-urban health, currently have dedicated geriatric outpatient services.
Less than 5%. That is a truly massive deficit. That structure simply cannot handle the demand of 319 million seniors.
It can't. The current setup is designed for basic curative care, communicable diseases, primary maternal services. It is fundamentally not equipped or funded or staffed to handle the complexity of geriatric care.
And this leads us to the other critical issue, which is economic insecurity. It just makes the health crisis worse.
It absolutely does.
How widespread is that economic insecurity among the elderly population right now?
The statistics are sobering. We are drawing here from the government's latest comprehensive assessment, the NSSO 75th round data. That report found that only 28% of the elderly population have any form of formal pension.
Any form at all, state or private.
Any form.
So if I'm doing the math right, that means roughly 3 out of every 4 elderly citizens are relying entirely on meager personal savings, which a chronic illness would wipe out instantly, or
most commonly, on their children and family support structures.
which places enormous financial and emotional stress on the working-age population.
Precisely. When 72% of your aging population lacks a reliable income, their health challenges automatically become massive economic burdens for their families, which then strains the whole public healthcare system.
Okay, so if we synthesize all of this, the sheer scale, the disease burden, the dailies, the economic insecurity, what is the central overriding policy objective we need to pursue right now?
The goal has to move beyond simply extending life expectancy. That's a 20th century goal. The policy objective needs to be focused squarely on achieving functional longevity.
Functional longevity, I like that term.
We need policies that ensure those added years are productive, healthy, and allow for independence.
And are we seeing any movement in that direction?
We are, thankfully. We see timely initiatives like the BHARAT study, which is a big step towards developing context-specific interventions.
BHARAT. What does that stand for?
It stands for the Burden of Aging, Health, and Research in India. And it aims to generate the kind of comprehensive data we need to design preventative, specialized elder care that's tailored to India's unique socioeconomic landscape.
So it's an investment in research now to prevent a massive crisis later.
That's the idea.
That structural social challenge really sets the stage. Let's pivot now from that social infrastructure to the development of our human capital, our future workforce, by looking at the state of the National Education Policy, NEP 2020.
Good transition.
It's now reaching its 5-year implementation mark.
And the NEP 2020 is, it's probably the most ambitious educational overhaul in a generation. It completely replaced the previous framework that had been in place, largely unchanged since 1986.
And its stated goal is huge, transformative, moving the whole system from rote memorization to skill-based, application-oriented learning.
Oh, that's the ambition.
Can you just quickly remind us of the core architectural change, the one that always grabs the headlines?
Sure. The most visible structural change is that shift from the rigid, old 10+2 system to the more flexible and developmentally aligned 5+3+3+4 academic system.
Right.
And this new structure intentionally integrates early childhood care for ages 3 to 8 into formal education. And it tries to delay specialization until the later grades. But the ambition of the policy runs so much deeper than just those numbers.
Okay, so what are the other critical features?
Well, the documents you send highlight several. There's sweeping curricular reform, which is aimed at cutting down the content load and moving away from standardized textbooks. There's strategic pedagogy, focusing heavily on experiential, hands-on learning.
I see multilingualism, holistic development.
Exactly. A strong policy mandate for multilingualism to promote mother tongue instruction. Holistic development to break down those artificial walls between arts, sciences, and vocational training. And critically, strategic assessments.
Designed to move beyond just testing rote recall.
And instead measure actual learning outcomes.
That blueprint sounds visionary. It's a modernizing, holistic framework designed to create thinking students, not just memorizing machines.
It is.
But this is where we have to pause. Because the data that you've pulled out reveals a really shocking contrast between this policy ambition and the uncomfortable on-the-ground reality, especially when we look at the PARAKH report findings.
The contrast is stark, you're right, and it forces us to really question the quality of the implementation.
First, let's clearly define PARAKHs.
Okay, so PARAKH stands for Performance Assessment, Review, and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. It's the centralized assessment body set up under the NSERT. It's essentially taken over and elevated the role that the old National Achievement Survey used to have.
So this is the official national yardstick for measuring if NEP 2020 is actually working.
At the fundamental level, yes.
And what did the specific Rashtriya Sarvekshan report findings reveal about the state of learning across the country? After 5 years of this policy push,
It revealed what analysts are calling severe and entrenched learning deficits, especially in foundational concept application.
in which subjects?
Core subjects, mathematics and science, across critical grades 3, 6, and 9, the deficits are quantitative and they show that students are, well, they're often failing to use what they theoretically know.
Give us an example. What about the maths results?
Look at maths. The report found that only 28 to 31% of students could actually apply core concepts like calculating a percentage or using fractions in a real-life problem.
That's incredibly low.
It gets more fundamental. Only 31% demonstrated a solid working understanding of number sets, distinguishing between integers, rational, or real numbers. That is essential building block knowledge.
That is the core of the problem, isn't it? If the whole policy aims for experiential learning and students can't even apply basic fractions, it suggests that despite the structural change, the 5 plus 3 plus 3, the teaching methodology, or maybe the teacher training, is still stuck in the old rote learning paradigm.
That is the inescapable conclusion. The systemic failure is one of pedagogy, not just policy architecture.
And did the science results show the same thing?
They amplify this concern, absolutely. Only 34% of students could distinguish between living and non-living traits, a concept taught in primary grades.
34%.
And when they were assessed on physics-based phenomena, a mere 37% could successfully explain concepts related to pressure, temperature, and density.
So we're seeing this conceptual deficit across the board.
We are. It extends into chemistry and biology, too. Roughly only a third of students could clearly articulate concepts like basic electric circuits or hormonal changes or magnetic effects.
Those numbers are incredibly sobering. The sheer scale of that conceptual gap
It's true.
suggests that whatever the policy intent is, it's not penetrating the actual classroom experience.
Right.
Why? Why is there such a massive gap 5 years in?
Well, the transition itself is monumental. You're trying to move an entire system of millions of teachers from rote instruction to experiential learning. That requires an equally monumental effort in teacher training and resource allocation, which has to be sustained over years.
And the report suggests that hasn't happened.
They suggest that while the policy framework is solid, the granular implementation, the training manuals, the funding for new labs and resources, ensuring accountability at the block level, it just hasn't kept pace.
And this is where federalism comes in.
Exactly. Education is on the concurrent list, so implementation quality varies wildly from state to state.
And yet some states manage to perform strongly, which gives us some hope that effective strategies do exist.
Absolutely. The PARAKH report did highlight high-performing states and union territories. We saw robust results in Punjab, Kerala, Himachal Pradesh, Chandigarh, and Dadra Nagar Haveli, Daman and Diu.
What are they doing right?
They've often focused strongly on local capacity building, foundational literacy and numeracy initiatives, and providing really targeted teacher support. It shows that institutional commitment translates directly into measurable learning outcomes.
What's fascinating here is
The dramatic chasm. This report exposes this huge gap between the ambitious theory laid out in NEP 2020, designed for holistic applied knowledge, and the undeniable, concrete, on-the-ground reality reflected by the PARAKH data.
it throws the challenge of implementation, resources, and teacher development into sharp relief.
It really does.
Yeah.
For policymakers and educators alike.
Because if the new structure is in place but the foundational understanding is missing, the whole structure just becomes hollow. And this issue connects directly to economic outcomes, which I think leads us neatly into our next section.
Perfect.
We shift our focus now from the potential of human capital to how we actually measure equity within the economy itself. For a rapidly growing nation, managing and measuring economic inequality is a critical policy challenge, and the standard tool we always hear about is the Gini coefficient.
Right. The Gini coefficient is the global statistical measure. It's designed specifically to quantify income or wealth inequality within a population.
And it operates on a simple scale.
A very precise scale. From 0 to 1, 0 represents theoretical perfect equality. Everyone earns exactly the same. And 1 represents perfect inequality. One person earns everything, everyone else gets nothing.
It sounds like a beautifully straightforward metric, a single number to summarize a really complex phenomenon. But the sources you shared strongly emphasize that just relying on the Gini coefficient isn't enough. It can even be misleading. Why do we need to be critical when we look at that single number?
This is the crucial blind spot that analysts want you to recognize. The Gini is, by its nature, an aggregate measure, and when you aggregate, you lose detail, especially about the extremes. Its primary limitation is that it fails to show the intensity and the composition of wealth and income concentration at the very top, or the very bottom.
Okay, break that down for us.
Let's frame it this way. The Gini coefficient is mathematically incapable of accurately highlighting the wealth held specifically by the top 0.1% of the population.
Why not?
Because that extreme concentration gets hidden, it's smoothed out in the overall calculation. Similarly, it doesn't give you a clear picture of the sheer lack of income or wealth held by the bottom 50%.
So you could have two countries with the same Gini score.
Exactly. You could have two countries with the exact same Gini score, but in one, the wealth is held by the top 10%. In the other, it's all concentrated in the hands of the top 0.1%. The Gini coefficient wouldn't differentiate between those two dramatically different economic realities.
So relying on Gini alone gives us this kind of blurred, almost polite picture of inequality, which lets extreme wealth concentration get obscured. If Gini is insufficient, what supplementary data points do analysts recommend we use to get a truly comprehensive picture?
To move from a blurry picture to a high-resolution one, we need disaggregated metrics. The reports explicitly recommended supplementing Gini data with metrics like the top 1% wealth share. That's designed specifically to capture that elite concentration.
Okay, what else?
We should also look at distribution ratios, like the P90-P10 ratio. That compares the income of someone at the 90th percentile to someone at the 10th percentile. It shows you the gap between the rich and the poor, not just the super rich.
And there was one more, the Thiel index.
Yes, the Thiel index. It's favored by some economists because it's highly sensitive to changes in income distribution across the entire spectrum. Using all of these together gives you actionable insight.
Beyond just social fairness, high inequality has concrete, measurable effects on the macroeconomy. What are the key implications of high inequality for an economy like India's, particularly one that's striving for rapid, sustained growth?
There are three critical interlocking implications that create systemic instability. The first is reduced economic mobility.
The Great Gatsby Curve phenomenon.
Exactly. If the chasm between the richest and the poor becomes too wide, it severely limits the upward movement and opportunities available to the bottom 50%. It traps generations in poverty, wastes human capital, and slows down productivity.
And the second implication?
Lower aggregate demand. This is just pure macroeconomics. The middle and lower classes tend to spend proportionally more of their income, which fuels market demand.
Whereas the very wealthy save or invest.
Right. The very wealthy tend to save or invest their enormous earnings, often abroad or in non-productive assets. Those savings don't translate into proportional domestic consumption, which suppresses overall market demand and limits growth potential.
And the third implication touches upon the stability of the entire system itself.
Precisely. The third one is social fragmentation. High, visible, and persistent inequality inevitably fuels resentment, distrust, and a sense of unfairness. That erodes social cohesion.
Which can lead to political instability.
It can, making long-term policymaking difficult. This is why accurately measuring and actively reducing inequality isn't just a moral imperative, it's an economic necessity.
That discussion on inequality naturally leads us to accountability within governance, especially how we deliver welfare benefits effectively.
The great connection.
The higher the inequality, the more critical, robust welfare delivery becomes, which is why we saw that relevant discussion in the source material around the Public Accounts Committee, or PANGSE, urging a major review of UIDI's digital governance.
Yes, this is a vital convergence point where digital efficiency meets human equity. The PANGSE urged a comprehensive high-level review of UIDI's functioning across the country.
What was the specific trigger for that? I mean, that's a serious step for a committee like the PANG to take regarding a flagship tool like Aadhaar.
The trigger was direct and rooted in real-world human impact. It was documented persistent instances of biometric verification failures.
So people not getting their benefits.
Exactly. These failures resulted in the wrongful and often persistent exclusion of eligible citizens from crucial welfare schemes, like the public distribution system or national pensions.
So even though Aadhaar is hailed as a great tool for direct benefit transfer,
And it has been. We've seen its success in transparently transferring astronomical sums, like the 44 lakh crore mentioned in the context of Digital India. But the PARAKH highlighted a crucial ethical and operational failure.
Which is?
When the technology fails to authenticate a genuinely eligible person, it denies essential rights and resources to the most vulnerable citizens, people who often lack the means to fix a biometric error. The PARAKH's mandate is to ensure that digital efficiency doesn't come at the cost of exclusion.
Can you quickly clarify the mechanism and importance of the PARAKH itself? It's considered one of the most powerful accountability committees in our parliamentary system.
It is the apex financial scrutiny body of the Parliament. Its primary function is to audit the accounts of the Union government, basing its work on the reports submitted by the Comptroller and Auditor General, the CAG.
So it's a post-mortem check.
It is. It checks if money was spent legally and efficiently. And crucially, its membership comprises 22 MPs, 15 from the Lok Sabha, and 7 from the Rajya Sabha.
And it's traditionally chaired by an opposition leader.
Right, which encourages genuine, nonpartisan oversight and accountability over government spending. The committee is reconstituted annually, ensuring continuous high-level scrutiny.
So the message is clear. Digital efficiency is necessary, but accountability mechanisms like the PARAKH review must be robust enough to ensure that technology serves equity, especially in a country grappling with the kind of inequality we just discussed.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Moving to the environmental domain, a core pillar of our deep dive. India has long been celebrated globally for its success with flagship conservation species. Let's start with the incredible, undeniable achievement of Project Tiger.
Project Tiger is a remarkable global conservation model. It really demonstrates what focused national will can achieve. Launched way back in 1973, it's seen steady strategic expansion. Today, the initiative covers 58 reserves, which is about 2% of India's total land area.
A small footprint that yields immense results.
Immense. The most recent data confirms the success story. India has successfully doubled its wild tiger population from around 1,400 individuals in 2006 to a robust 3,682 counted in 2024.
Wow.
This means India has met the global TX2 target, the goal of doubling wild tiger numbers, significantly ahead of the 2022 deadline. And this success isn't just about counting cats, it's about preserving entire fragile ecosystems.
That is genuinely a phenomenal achievement. But it raises an important question that the material addressed. Often conservation focuses so heavily on these charismatic flagship species that they sometimes overlook the smaller, equally vital carnivores in the same landscapes.
That is a critical point. The health of the ecosystem depends on the entire food web, not just the apex predator.
So what did the material highlight about these hidden gems, the small cats?
The reports wisely spotlighted two important, yet often overlooked, lesser carnivores. First, the fishing cat.
Okay.
This cat is unique because it's heavily reliant on wetlands and riparian zones. It plays a vital role in controlling fish and small prey populations in these sensitive areas. It's rightly recognized as the state animal of West Bengal.
And the second one?
The second is the rusty-spotted cat. This fascinating creature holds the unique distinction of being the world's smallest wildcat. They are tiny, secretive, and crucial for controlling rodent and insect populations.
So when we conserve the habitat of a tiger,
We are inherently conserving the complex habitats needed by these small cats, too. We're ensuring the stability of the entire prey base. Their presence is often a marker of a truly healthy, undisturbed forest floor ecosystem.
that's a fantastic connection between the scale of the tiger and the subtle importance of the smallest cat. And speaking of advanced conservation, the materials also mention advanced forensic techniques being deployed for rhino protection.
Yes, this brings technology directly into the conservation fight. The Assam Forest Department is focusing on the greater one-horned rhinoceros. A major stronghold is Kaziranga National Park, where the species is listed as vulnerable by the IUCN.
And what are they doing?
They're initiating genetic analysis of over 2,500 rhino horn samples that were seized or stored. This effort is aimed at building India's sophisticated rhino DNA index system, or RODIS.
How does that help with anti-poaching?
Since rhino horns are made of keratin, creating a unique genetic fingerprint for each horn allows law enforcement to trace seized horns back to the specific area or even the specific animal they came from. This genetic fingerprinting is a crucial high-tech tool that shuts down the illegal trade supply chain by making every transaction traceable.
Now we transition into a segment designed for pure consolidation. A deep dive into highly distilled, high-yield facts drawn from the material.
Okay, a rapid fire round. Starting with global geography, 2 quick facts that highlight global extremes. First, Chile is geographically notable as the world's longest north-south trending country.
Which gives it that astonishing variety of climates and ecosystems.
It does, and nestled within that immense country is a famous extreme geological feature.
The Atacama Desert.
That's right. The Atacama, globally recognized as the world's driest desert. It's a hyper-arid environment that scientists often use as a planetary analog for studying Mars.
Moving to cultural heritage, we had a major win for India on the global stage. The inscription of India's 44th World Heritage Site.
This is a tremendous achievement. It's the Maratha military landscapes of India. And crucially, this isn't a single location. It's a meticulously preserved network of 12 strategic forts, including iconic sites like Shifneri, Lohgad, Raigad, and the island fort Sintudurg.
And the inscription recognizes the military vision of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj.
Exactly. And the adaptive, sophisticated architectural designs. These structures represent a masterful use of terrain, from hill forts integrated into rugged mountains to island forts like Sintudurg, built to command the Arabian Sea. It's a recognition of adaptive military engineering and cultural legacy.
Okay, this has been an incredibly deep navigation through a very dense stack of material.
It certainly has.
We started with that immense demographic challenge of 319 million older people by 2050. We analyzed the striking gap between the ambitious goals of NEP 2020 and the disappointing learning deficits revealed by the PARAKH report.
Then we moved to the subtle metrics of economic equity, noting why the Gini coefficient alone just fails to tell the full story.
We checked on governmental accountability with the PAK's critical review of UIDI exclusion errors, and we ended by dissecting vital conservation successes and some policy rollbacks on the environment and even technological leaps in timekeeping and rail.
It's a lot to hold in your head at once.
It is. So, if we connect this to the bigger picture, what is the core takeaway for anyone trying to navigate this landscape?
I think the core takeaway is the absolute necessity of integrated policy planning. We simply cannot afford to view these challenges in isolation anymore. Well, the economic security and geriatric health services needed for the elderly that focus on functional longevity, they must be funded. That, in turn, requires a robust, high-skill workforce.
And that workforce hinges directly on fixing the foundational learning quality issues that the PARAKH data exposed.
Exactly, despite the structural reforms of NEP. And furthermore, the economic policies we pursue have to genuinely measure and actively work to reduce inequality using detailed metrics beyond just the aggregate Gironi. We have to ensure that prosperity is both sustainable and actually reaches the bottom 50%.
The resilience of the whole system depends on strengthening every single one of these pillars simultaneously.
You've got it. They're all connected.
We deeply appreciate you sharing all these comprehensive sources for this deep dive, allowing us to consolidate them into these key insights and connections for you.
My pleasure.
And before we sign off, here is one final provocative thought for you to explore on your own time. The NEP 2020 aims for holistic development and application-based learning, moving away from rote memorization. Yet the PARAKH report reveals that students are struggling profoundly with fundamental concept application in subjects like math and science. So what systemic overhaul beyond mere policy structure shifts, beyond the 5+3+4 system, is truly needed in areas like teacher accountability, funding, or curriculum delivery to translate that visionary educational policy intent into true functional learning on the ground?
That's a great question. You should think about the practical steps required to bridge that vast chasm between what the national policy promises and what the average student currently demonstrates in their ability to apply core concepts. It's really the difference between aspiration and achievement.
A question that demands critical thought and perhaps a radical new approach to implementation. That wraps up this deep dive. Stay curious, keep learning, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.